They told you to find peace by fixing everything around you, by getting the perfect job, fixing every flaw, controlling every outcome. But if that worked, why does the mind still race at night? Why does the heart still feel heavy, even in silence? Why does the tension never truly leave, no matter how much is achieved? The truth is, calm doesn't come from outside. It comes from within, from how the mind sits with the world, not how the world bends to the mind. Buddhism has been whispering this truth for over 2,500 years, not through loud promises, but through quiet power, through stillness, through awareness, through letting go. Tonight, something will shift. As these teachings unfold, the noise in your head will start to fade. That restless need to fix, to grasp, to rush, it'll loosen. You'll feel it, like a knot slowly untangling, like water finally becoming still, like a soft exhale after holding your breath for far too long. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is medicine for the modern mind, a guided walk through ancient paths that lead straight into the present moment, into deep rest, into clarity, into peace. Are you ready to come home to yourself? Let's begin. And now that the mind is beginning to settle, let's walk into the first doorway, the path that doesn't shout but speaks loudest in its quiet. It's time to explore what most never hear, not because it isn't there, but because they never knew how to listen. There's a sound that isn't made by anything external. It has no volume, no echo, no vibration. And yet, it changes everything. It's not silence, as in the absence of noise. It's the presence of awareness. That's what Buddhist monks have trained for lifetimes to hear. The soundless gong. It rings only when the mind is still enough to feel it. Most people live in noise, not because the world is loud, but because their thoughts are. The phone doesn't need to beep for the mind to check it. No one needs to speak for the heart to feel pressure. This is the chase. A mind that's addicted to friction, to interpretation, to analysis. But what happens when the analysis ends? Not because the answer was found, but because the need to answer dissolved. That's the entry point. Silence in Buddhism isn't mute. It's not a lack. It's an active presence. Like standing in a forest and feeling the whole world breathing without words. Like watching a candle flicker in a dark room and realizing the room was never truly dark. It just hadn't been seen without distraction. That's what happens when the inner chatter fades. You start to notice not just the external world, but the stillness underneath it. The clarity that was always there but buried beneath commentary. To train the mind to hear what isn't said is to stop needing life to speak in your language. Because life already speaks, it just doesn't always use words. A falling leaf, a slow breath, a pause in conversation. Most miss it because they're too busy preparing their reply, planning their next move, wondering how they're being seen. But the soundless gong doesn't care about those things. It waits. And the moment you stop chasing noise, it rings. This is why so much of Buddhist training revolves around silence. Not silence as in quiet surroundings, but silence as in inner stillness. A mind that stops grasping doesn't become dull. It becomes sharp in a new way. It begins to hear subtleties, emotions without names, truths that don't need to be spoken. Wisdom starts to show itself not in big revelations, but in subtle shifts, in how you breathe, how you wait, how you choose not to react. One of the most misunderstood aspects of meditation is that it's just about relaxing. But if it were only about calmness, anyone could just lie down and scroll on their phone. True meditation is more powerful. It teaches the mind how to pause without checking out, how to listen deeply without judging, how to hold space for the unknown. That kind of silence transforms not just the mood, but the whole perception of reality. Think about how rare it is to simply sit and be, without labeling, without categorizing, without trying to fix. That's what hearing the soundless gong trains. A mind that no longer needs to solve everything to be okay. It's a deep unlearning, an untangling of years spent trying to manage the world by overthinking it. This doesn't mean silence solves problems. It means it shifts the relationship to problems. A noisy mind fights reality. A silent mind joins it. When this happens, stress doesn't need to be eliminated. It dissolves because the resistance to it is gone. The situation may remain, but the fight within you doesn't. One Zen teacher once said that silence is the loudest teacher because it reflects everything you bring to it. Sit with silence long enough and it shows you your restlessness. Stay longer and it shows you your fear. Stay even longer and it shows you freedom. Not because the silence gave you answers, but because it revealed the questions were never necessary to begin with. Many people fear silence because it exposes their own mind. But that's the point. What's seen can be softened. What's hidden remains in control. So if the thoughts rush in when things go quiet, don't push them away. Listen to them, not to believe them, but to understand the patterns. See how often they repeat, how little they change, and then let them pass. Like clouds in the sky, like wind through bamboo. No need to hold, no need to fight. In Buddhism, one of the deepest practices is noble silence. Not just quiet lips, but a quiet ego, a quiet identity, a quiet need to prove. That's where calm begins. Not in shutting the world out, but in no longer demanding that it be any different than it is. The silence teaches this without speaking. It just stands, unmoved, and lets everything move around it. To hear what isn't said is to stop responding to every mental impulse, not because it's bad to think, but because not every thought is useful. Some are echoes, old scripts, residue of past fears. They don't need to be solved, just heard, acknowledged, and allowed to leave. Think of the mind like a room full of radios. Each station a thought, an emotion, a memory. Most people try to manage the noise by adjusting the volume on each one. But the practice isn't in the knobs. It's in stepping back, realizing the radios don't define the room. Silence was always there, under the static. It's not something you create. It's something you uncover. And as you uncover it, you'll notice something strange. Peace doesn't shout. It doesn't sell. It doesn't beg for your attention. That's why it's missed. But once it's felt, it becomes magnetic. The more you sit in it, the more you want to stay. Not because it entertains, but because it returns you to yourself. And in that returning, everything else begins to soften. The judgments, the cravings, the constant need to control. They don't vanish instantly, but they lose their grip. Because in silence, nothing can pretend, not even fear. It becomes transparent. And in its transparency, it becomes powerless. The great Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything." That line alone is a teaching. When the mind is silent, it sees more, not less. It feels more, not less. It understands, not by analyzing, but by being in contact, with breath, with now, with life, raw and unfiltered. There is no rush in this. The soundless gong doesn't work on your schedule. It waits until you're ready. It waits until the need to be done falls away, until you're no longer trying to use silence as a tool to get somewhere else, but are finally willing to just be in it for its own sake. And it's in that surrender that calm begins, not as a reward, but as the ground that was always under your feet, the sky that was always above your head. You just hadn't noticed because the commentary was too loud. Tonight, let that commentary fall. Let the interpretations go. Let the mind listen, not for answers, but for the space in which questions dissolve. That space is sacred. That space is clarity. That space is where the soundless gong rings. And now that silence has softened the edges of the mind, we meet the next storm. Not a storm of sound, but of speed. Because after stillness comes the rush. Not the rush of life itself, but the pressure inside the mind to keep up, to fix, to chase, to solve. The urgency that whispers, "This must be handled now," even when it's not true. It's time to step into that illusion and slowly dismantle it. There's a kind of rush that doesn't come from real danger. It comes from habit, a learned momentum that makes the mind feel like it's always behind, always missing something, always just one task away from peace. This is the illusion of urgency. It feels like truth, but it's a trick, a mental reflex built on years of reinforcing the idea that worth comes from speed, value comes from doing, and stillness is weakness. Buddhism calls this restlessness tanha, a thirst, a craving. Not just for things, but for resolution, for next steps, for constant movement. But when that thirst isn't questioned, it drives everything. It becomes the fuel behind overthinking, behind anxiety, behind burnout. It's the reason so many people lie in bed, body still, but mind sprinting. Not because anything needs doing, but because the brain doesn't know how to stop running. Urgency is often praised in modern culture. Hustle is glorified. Productivity is worshipped. But Buddhism quietly disagrees. It teaches that the rush to act without awareness leads to suffering. It leads to doing out of fear, out of panic, out of the illusion that peace will come after everything is handled. But when is that ever true? Life doesn't pause long enough for that moment to arrive. Something new always takes its place, another task, another worry, another demand. So the real practice begins here, not in managing more, but in believing less, in watching the mind yell, "Now," and gently questioning it. Is this really urgent? What would happen if I didn't respond immediately? What if this feeling isn't truth, but just a leftover alarm bell from years of conditioning? The Buddhist path doesn't fight urgency with more urgency. It meets it with awareness, like watching a wave rise without trying to outrun it, just watching it crest, watching it pass. Because when urgency is seen clearly, it reveals itself. Most of the time, it's not a real need. It's just a pressure loop, a pattern, a habit of speeding up instead of slowing down. That's why monks walk slowly, why rituals are unhurried, why tea is sipped, not gulped. Every movement is a message. There is no emergency here. Even if the world is spinning fast, the mind doesn't have to. There's always a choice. You can pause, you can return, you can respond from center, not from panic. This pause is powerful, not because it changes the outer world, but because it changes the relationship to it. Instead of being yanked by urgency, the practitioner becomes the observer, watching the tug, feeling the pull, and then not moving, just being, just breathing. In that moment, time expands, pressure loses its grip, and the illusion starts to crumble. One of the greatest gifts of mindfulness is timing, not fast timing, right timing. Knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to move forward and when to sit still. But right timing only arises in stillness, in presence, in slowness. That's what urgency steals, discernment. The next time urgency grips the chest or tightens the jaw, pause, just for a moment. Take one conscious breath, not to fix anything, not to run from it, just to interrupt the pattern. That breath is the first step out of the illusion, because no illusion can survive full awareness, especially this one. False emergencies thrive in momentum. But awareness disrupts momentum. It makes you question. It makes you look. And when you look, you often find there is no fire, just smoke, just habit, just fear dressed in important clothing. Slowing down doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing with clarity. It means acting when the mind is quiet, not when it's chaotic. Buddhism teaches right action, not fast action, and right action is born from stillness, from wisdom, from a mind that isn't being chased by its own urgency. Many people mistake urgency for passion. They believe that rushing means they care. But urgency isn't love. It's anxiety. It's attachment to outcomes. Love can move slowly. Passion can wait. Urgency, though, it demands. It panics. It tells you that if you don't act now, everything will collapse. That's fear talking, not truth. One of the most subtle teachings in Buddhism is that peace and urgency cannot coexist. Urgency creates friction in the nervous system. It speeds the heart, tightens the breath, closes the body. But peace expands. It opens the chest. It softens the gaze. It slows the breath. So every moment of pause is a return to peace, a quiet rebellion against a world that glorifies rushing. This doesn't mean you abandon responsibility. It means you stop reacting from compulsion. It means you do what needs to be done, but from a place of center, not from a place of collapse. That shift changes everything, not just how things are done, but how they feel. Buddhist master Ajahn Chah once said, "If it's urgent, it can wait." At first, that sounds wrong, but read it again. If it's urgent, it can wait, because urgency without clarity is chaos. And when you wait, even for just one breath, clarity returns. This is the power of slowing down. It doesn't delay your life. It delivers it, fully, consciously, moment by moment. The rush to get ahead often leads people away from where they already are. And where they are is the only place peace can be found. So let the world rush. Let the notifications buzz. Let the clock tick. But stay here. Stay in this breath, in this stillness, because the illusion of urgency only works if you believe it. Once you stop believing it, it loses its power, and what remains is calm, presence, simplicity. Some monks say that time bends around awareness, that when the mind is still, time slows. And in that slowness, things become clear. Decisions become easier. The heart speaks louder. The body softens. And life, instead of rushing by, becomes touchable. This is the calm inside pressure, the quiet that doesn't wait for peace but brings it, right here, right now, not by escaping urgency, but by seeing through it, like fog burning away in the light of morning. So tonight, let every urge to rush rise and then fall. Don't follow it, don't fight it, just watch it. Let it pass. The breath will stay, the moment will stay. That's what's real. That's where calm lives. And from here, the next step will come. Not because it must, but because it's true. Now that the grip of urgency has loosened and the breath no longer chases time, the mind stands at the edge of a deeper freedom. A kind of freedom that doesn't come from doing less, but from holding on less. It's time to turn toward thought itself, not to silence it, not to battle it, but to see it clearly. To let it rise and fall without needing to hold, fix, or judge. Because what happens next is not about controlling thoughts. It's about letting them float. There's a way of looking at thought that transforms the whole relationship with the mind, not by understanding every thought, but by recognizing what thoughts really are. Temporary, shapeless, ephemeral, like clouds across the sky. They form, they drift, they disappear, and none of them are the sky itself, just as no thought is the mind itself, no feeling is the truth, no emotion is forever. Buddhism doesn't ask the mind to stop thinking, it teaches how to stop attaching. This discipline is subtle. It's not loud like effort. It's quiet like awareness. It begins in a breath. The thought comes in. A reaction rises. But instead of grasping it, instead of identifying with it, the awareness steps back. It sees the thought, labels it softly, names the feeling without becoming it. Sadness, restlessness, excitement, doubt. And in that naming, the thought loses weight. It becomes a visitor, not a command. Most people suffer not because of thoughts, but because of fusion with them. They believe every thought must be true, every inner voice must be followed, every fear must be avoided. But thoughts are not truths. They are stories, and stories can be watched without being lived. The art of staring at clouds begins here, in observing without absorbing, in witnessing without reacting, in letting the story pass without becoming its character. Thoughts will say, "You're not enough." Awareness replies, "That's a thought." Thoughts whisper, "Something bad is coming." Awareness answers, "That's a prediction." Thoughts scream, "Fix it now." Awareness pauses and simply breathes. This space between thought and self is where peace is born. Because the problem is rarely the thought itself, it's the belief that the thought is personal, permanent, or proof of who you are. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron often says that thoughts are like weather. Some days it storms, some days it clears. But the sky doesn't try to stop the rain. It doesn't panic when clouds gather. It just stays. The mind can learn this too. To stay, to observe, to remain untouched. This isn't disconnection. It's connection without fusion. It's feeling everything without drowning in anything. The sadness is seen, held, allowed, but it isn't mistaken for identity. The fear is noticed, but not obeyed. The judgment arises, but the self doesn't collapse under it. This kind of clarity is calm, not because the mind is empty, but because the heart no longer grips. To stare at clouds means to practice detachment, not coldness, not suppression, but gentle distance. Enough space between you and the thought to breathe, to choose, to see. In this practice, everything slows, not because time changes, but because urgency fades. Thought loses its command tone and becomes background noise. You hear it, but you don't have to answer. Even helpful thoughts can become cages when clung to too tightly. I must be wise. I should be better. This shouldn't be happening. These are the clouds shaped like goals. They seem positive, but they still obscure the sky. Buddhism doesn't teach attachment to good thoughts over bad. It teaches freedom from both. Because freedom isn't about choosing better chains. It's about walking without chains at all. This practice deepens when done in silence. Sit. Watch. Don't chase thought. Don't push it away. Let it come. Let it leave. Feel the mind's rhythm without altering it. Thoughts will scream for attention. Some will beg to be solved. Others will tempt with stories of success or doom. Let them all speak and let them pass. Eventually, something quiet begins to emerge beneath it all. A stillness that was always there, but never noticed. Not because it was absent, but because attention was always elsewhere. This stillness doesn't ask for your loyalty. It doesn't need defense. It's just there. Like the space around the clouds. Like the sky that never moves. The art of non-attachment reveals this, that thoughts are not enemies, and silence is not failure. To let go of thought is not to lose your mind, it's to return to it. To see clearly without commentary. To live without being pulled in every direction. Even when thoughts are loud, presence can be louder, not in volume, but in stability. The Buddha once said, "You are not your thoughts." And it's only when that's felt, not just known, that calm truly begins. Because when the observer wakes up, the story loses control. And when the story loses control, suffering fades. Not instantly, but reliably, like fog lifting under sunlight. Training in this way doesn't mean thoughts stop. They still arise, but you no longer become them. Anger may come, but it doesn't take the wheel. Worry may rise, but it doesn't paralyze. Jealousy may whisper, but it doesn't define. Because you're not in the thought anymore. You're in the watching, the spaciousness, the freedom. This discipline is available at any moment, in the middle of a crowd, in the middle of an argument, in the middle of a racing heart. Pause. Feel the breath. Watch the mind move. Don't interfere, just witness. That's the art. That's the liberation. Even during sleep, the mind floats. Dreams are thoughts wearing costumes, but the one who watches can remain still, even then. And as this awareness grows stronger, the inner weather matters less. It rains, it clears, but peace stays. Not because conditions are perfect, but because the sky is remembered. Now that thoughts have been seen as passing clouds, and the sky of awareness has begun to widen, something even deeper begins to stir. It's the moment itself. Not as an idea, not as a background, but as something sacred. And the way to meet it isn't through force, it's through reverence, through an inner bowing, not of submission, but of stillness. Because when the grip on control loosens, presence doesn't vanish, it deepens. There's a habit built into the human mind: control. Control of outcomes, of perception, of others, of the self. It starts early and becomes invisible. People learn to predict, to prevent, to prepare for what might go wrong. But what no one teaches is that most suffering comes from that very effort to manage what was never meant to be mastered. The Buddhist path doesn't punish this instinct, it softens it. And it replaces control not with chaos, but with reverence. Bowing to the moment isn't a ritual gesture. It's a mental posture, a way of meeting life without armor, of showing up without the demand that it change. It's the softest form of strength, the kind that doesn't break in the wind, but bends with grace. And in that bowing, something ancient is remembered, that humility isn't weakness, it's clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when you stop wrestling with reality and start welcoming it. Control narrows the view. It makes every moment a problem to solve. It filters life through expectation. But reverence expands awareness. It allows the moment to speak, not in language, but in presence. A single breath, a pause in conversation, the feel of ground beneath bare feet. These are not accidents, they are invitations, and when met with reverence, they become teachings. The reason most people miss the present moment isn't because it's hidden. It's because it's judged. It arrives and the mind immediately measures it. Is this good or bad? Useful or useless? Does this serve my goal? But bowing means none of that. Bowing is what happens when the moment no longer needs to earn its place. It's allowed, fully, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Buddhist teacher Jack Cornfield once said, "Peace comes when our hearts are open to whatever is." This is the essence of bowing, not liking everything, not agreeing with it, but opening to it, letting the moment be what it is before trying to shape it, because every moment has its own nature, its own flavor. Some are warm, some are sharp, some are confusing, but each one, when met without resistance, becomes a doorway to stillness. In practice, this means softening the need to control conversations, to fix others, to predict outcomes. It means catching the micro-reactions, the urge to correct, to defend, to interrupt, and instead breathing, waiting, listening. Bowing is silence where reaction used to be, space where argument used to live, compassion where resistance used to grow. This shift doesn't mean passivity, it means responsiveness over reactivity. It means choosing presence instead of panic. And that choice can only arise when reverence is felt, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. A quiet awe for the now, a trust that even this, whatever this is, belongs. Control says, this shouldn't be happening. Reverence says, this is happening. And in that simple shift, the heart stops bracing, the mind stops spinning. Life is allowed to unfold, not perfectly, but authentically. This is where the storm calms, not because the winds die down, but because the mind bows instead of fighting the weather. Think of how often control disguises itself as care. The parent who micromanages out of love. The leader who dominates out of fear. The friend who offers advice before listening. All of these begin with good intention, but they miss the moment. Reverence does the opposite. It listens, it watches, It holds space, and in that space, something wiser can arise. In Buddhist monasteries, even sweeping the floor is done as a sacred act. Not because dust is special, but because the moment is. This is the heart of reverence, the willingness to treat every now as worthy. The mundane becomes luminous, the ordinary becomes a temple, and the act of bowing isn't just for statues, it becomes the way the soul moves through the world. In your own life, this can look like taking a breath before replying to a difficult text, letting silence finish its sentence before jumping in with solutions, walking slower without filling the space with thoughts, feeling sadness without needing to name it or rush it away. Bowing to the moment means making peace with not knowing, letting mystery stay unsolved, letting the now be enough. And when this begins to take root, a new kind of strength appears. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to surrender without collapse. The strength to trust that you don't have to hold everything together for life to unfold wisely. That's what bowing teaches. It teaches trust, not in fate, but in presence. The present moment is the only place where reverence can happen. The past is too rigid, the future is too vague, but the now, it breathes, it moves, it waits for your attention. And when it's met with reverence, it blooms. Not because it becomes what you wanted, but because it becomes fully seen. In this way, bowing becomes a daily practice, one that doesn't need incense or chants. It needs only awareness. When the coffee spills, when the meeting goes wrong, when the child cries, when the plan collapses, bow. Not physically, but internally. Say yes, even if softly, even if it trembles, because in that yes, there is power, there is grace, there is calm. This is what Buddhism teaches so gently. The fight with life is optional. The storm may rage, the losses may come, the unknowns may multiply, but the mind can meet them differently. Not with a clenched fist, but with an open palm, with a bowed head and a steady breath. And in that bowing, the chaos loses its edge. So tonight, as thoughts continue to drift and the urge to plan or fix or fight rises, pause, bow to it all, the tiredness, the thinking, the heartache, the softness. Bow with your breath, with your stillness, with your trust. Let the moment be your teacher, not your enemy. From bowing to the moment comes a quiet strength, not the kind that holds its ground stubbornly, but the kind that flows, the kind that gives without breaking. And now that strength takes shape. It doesn't look like armor or resistance. It looks like bamboo, a symbol of what the mind can become when it stops hardening and starts bending. Because the mind, just like bamboo, is most powerful when it can move with life, not against it. There's a type of resilience that doesn't shout. It doesn't dominate or force. It doesn't crush what stands in its way. It absorbs, it shifts, it bends. This is the bamboo principle, the wisdom of non-resistance, where strength is measured not by how much is controlled, but by how much is accepted without losing balance. Bamboo doesn't snap in the storm because it knows how to yield. It sways, it adjusts, it lets the wind pass through instead of fighting it. And that's exactly what the mind can learn to do. When emotions surge, when plans fall apart, when someone else's anger threatens your calm, there is another way, a softer way, a way that doesn't require retreat or submission, but asks for presence without resistance. In Buddhism, non-resistance isn't passivity. It's aliveness. It's being in full contact with reality as it is, not as the mind wants it to be. It's not about being okay with everything. It's about staying balanced in anything. And just like bamboo, the mind becomes unbreakable when it learns to bend. Every time something difficult happens, there is a choice: resist and feel the weight of the fight, or bend and feel the shift of inner space. The discomfort might still be there, the situation might not change, but the relationship to it transforms. What once felt like pressure becomes a teacher, not because the pain vanished, but because the mind stopped pushing back. This shift doesn't require perfection. It begins in small places: a moment of tension in traffic, a disagreement at work, an unexpected change in plans. These are not interruptions, they're invitations, each one asking, will you stiffen or will you soften? Will you break or will you bend? Softening doesn't mean losing yourself. It means returning to yourself, letting go of the false identities that say, I must always be right, I must always be in control, I must never feel discomfort. Those are the brittle parts of the mind, the parts that crack when challenged. But the deeper self, the one that watches without attachment, that self is flexible. That self bends like bamboo. Flexibility also means letting go of rigid timelines. The mind loves structure, deadlines, goals, expectations. But life doesn't follow scripts. It unfolds. And when those scripts fall apart, the mind that clings suffers. But the mind that bends adapts. It moves with the moment, not against it. It listens, it learns, it finds its footing in new places. Mental resilience grows through this flexibility, not by avoiding difficulty, but by meeting it without collapse, like bamboo, which grows stronger not in perfect conditions, but through exposure to wind, to weight, to movement. The same is true for the mind. The more it bends in awareness, the more grounded it becomes. This grounding is not found in resistance. It's found in fluidity, the willingness to be fully present in change. To say yes, not to the pain, but to the process. To trust that even bending is a form of movement forward, a form of wisdom. Buddhist texts often describe the wise mind as like water, but bamboo carries a similar truth. Both adapt, both flow, both hold their form not by force, but by harmony with what surrounds them. This is how suffering lessens, not by fixing the world, but by softening the mind that meets it. To live the bamboo principle is to stop demanding that things go a certain way. It's learning to respond instead of react, to pivot without panic, to stay rooted without becoming rigid. And this can be practiced every day in the way you listen, the way you forgive, the way you pause before replying. Letting go of resistance also means letting go of judgment. The mind that resists often judges harshly. It wants certainty. It wants everything labeled, categorized, resolved. But the mind that bends doesn't need to rush to conclusions. It can sit with unknowns. It can hold paradox. It can be quiet in front of complexity. That's what makes it resilient. There's a saying in Zen, "Let the muddy water settle and clarity will appear." But the water doesn't settle by force. It settles when left alone. The same is true for the mind. When it stops trying to control every ripple, it begins to reflect. It becomes clear, calm, strong in its stillness. Bending with reality also includes forgiving yourself. Perfectionism is a form of inner resistance. It tightens the breath, it narrows the focus, it creates a constant sense of not being enough. But self-compassion bends that narrative. It says, "This moment is enough. I am enough." And in that softening, energy is freed. Peace returns. Strength is not found in the one who stands unmoved. It's found in the one who moves wisely, who dances with difficulty, who chooses grace over gritting their teeth. And this choice, once felt, becomes a habit, a way of being, a deeper kind of strength. Even in grief, this principle applies. Grief is not a wave to resist. It's a tide to bow to let it move through without drowning, to feel the weight of loss without hardening the heart. The mind that bends in sorrow remains human. It remains kind, and over time, it begins to heal. When anxiety arises, the bamboo mind doesn't fight it. It watches. It breathes. It allows the tension to exist without feeding it. This changes the entire nervous system, from reaction to regulation, from contraction to openness. And that openness, practiced again and again, becomes the baseline. It's not about never falling. It's about not shattering when you do. That's the gift of this practice. A life that feels less like a battle and more like a river, flowing through experience, meeting each turn with curiosity, not control, meeting each moment with grace, not gripping. Tonight, let the body relax into this truth. Let the breath move without effort. Let the mind bend gently with each new thought, each feeling, each sensation. No need to resist, no need to push. Just bend, just breathe. As the mind learns to bend like bamboo, a deeper strength begins to unfold, not just in how thoughts are met, but in how the body is felt. Because beneath the rush of the mind, beneath the swirl of emotions, there's something even more stable. The body, the breath, the ground under your feet. And when the awareness finally drops into this foundation, everything begins to settle. Not through thought, but through sensation. This is where we touch the earth inside. There is a quiet intelligence in the body that speaks long before the mind understands. It doesn't use words, it doesn't argue, it doesn't explain. It feels, it senses, it signals. Most people are so caught in their heads that this language goes unheard. But Buddhism teaches that the body is not a distraction from meditation. It's a doorway, a path into stillness that doesn't require solving, only sensing. The practice of somatic awareness means shifting attention downward, out of the story and into the breath, out of the explanation and into the pulse. It means feeling your feet while you're standing, noticing the heaviness in your hands, listening to the subtle vibration in your chest when you're sad or calm or afraid. These are not just signals, they're anchors. And when the mind is spinning, anchoring into the body is how you come home. This awareness doesn't need to be dramatic. It begins small. Feel the contact of your back against the chair, the sensation of air touching your face, the pressure where your body meets the ground. These aren't things you usually think about, but they're always there, always speaking in silence. When you listen, the mind begins to slow, not because it's told to, but because it finally has something solid to rest on. Many Buddhist traditions emphasize mindfulness of the body for this reason. Because thoughts are fast, but the body is steady. Thoughts jump timelines. They live in the past and race to the future. But the body lives now, right now. And when you feel it, truly feel it, the nervous system responds. The heart rate slows, the breath deepens, the jaw unclenches. Not because anything outside has changed, but because awareness came home. To touch the earth inside is to remember that safety was never in the plan, but in the presence. That calm isn't found in control, but in contact. The ground doesn't argue with the sky, it just holds everything. The body can do this too. It can hold emotion, it can hold thought, it can hold fear, and when it's held with awareness, it doesn't overwhelm. This is not about escaping thought, it's about rooting beneath it. Thoughts will continue. But when attention lives in the body, those thoughts feel lighter. They lose their stickiness. They pass more easily, because the mind is no longer trying to think its way into peace. It's feeling its way into stillness. A helpful practice is simply scanning the body, starting from the feet, feeling each toe, noticing warmth, coolness, tension, moving slowly upward, ankles, shins, knees, not to fix or judge, just to notice, just to be present. By the time awareness reaches the head, the energy of the whole system has shifted. Thought becomes less loud, emotion becomes more manageable. The mind feels less like a storm and more like a sky again. This is especially powerful during anxiety, because anxiety pulls you up into the head, into stories and loops and panic, but the body pulls you down, into breath, into contact, into now. And when now is fully felt, fear loses its edge, not because the fear is wrong, but because it's seen clearly, held gently, grounded in awareness. Even in grief, this works. Grief isn't just mental, it lives in the chest, in the shoulders, in the throat. To grieve somatically is to let the body weep, shake, breathe. Not to be dramatic, but to be honest. The mind may not understand the loss, but the body knows. And when the body is allowed to feel, healing begins. Grounding through the body also changes relationships. When you're present in your own sensations, you're less likely to project. You listen more. You react less. You can feel another person's words without taking them personally. Because your center isn't in the thought they're saying, it's in the body, you're breathing. That's where compassion grows. Not in theory, but in physical presence. This presence also transforms daily life. Washing hands becomes a meditation when you feel the water. Eating becomes mindfulness when you taste each bite. Walking becomes a practice when you feel your soles touching the earth. These are not advanced techniques. They're simple, but they're powerful, because they return you to the only place peace has ever been found, right here in sensation. Some might ask, what does touching the earth inside have to do with enlightenment? And the answer is everything. Because enlightenment isn't a concept. It's a direct contact with life. It's the full embodiment of now. Not a theory of presence, but the lived reality of it. And the body is the bridge. This is why monks walk barefoot, why rituals begin with bowing, why the breath is always central. It's not about tradition, it's about embodiment. The sacred isn't found in the sky, it's in the contact between the foot and the ground, between the inhale and the exhale, between awareness and the heartbeat. That's where stillness lives. To practice this, doesn't require anything new. No special posture, no special place, just attention. Just the willingness to feel without fleeing. When tension rises, go into it. When numbness appears, stay with it. The body will speak, sometimes with heat, sometimes with ache, sometimes with quiet, but it will always speak. And listening to it is the beginning of freedom. Freedom from what? From the prison of mental commentary, from the loop of overthinking, from the false belief that peace is found in solving every thought. Peace isn't found in thought. It's found in what holds thought, the breath, the belly, the heartbeat, the pressure of your hand resting against your leg. These are not distractions, they are sacred guides. Let this awareness grow slowly. No need to rush. Every time you return to the body, you're building the habit of presence, the habit of safety, the habit of grounded being. And over time, this changes everything. Because a grounded mind doesn't collapse under pressure. It doesn't drift endlessly. It knows where it stands, because it feels it. So tonight, let the mind settle downward. Let it rest in the rhythm of the lungs. Let it listen to the silence in the bones. Let it feel the stability that has always been there, not in the world, but in you, in the unshakable stillness beneath thought. From the steady ground of somatic awareness, where breath and body become anchors, the path leads inward still, into something even more refined. Beneath the sensations, beneath the shifting moods, beneath even the act of noticing, there is a still point, a center, a flame that burns without flickering. This is not stillness you hold, it's stillness that holds you. It's called samadhi, a depth of attention so steady, so unwavering, that the whole world grows quiet, and the mind, for the first time, begins to rest. There is a kind of peace that isn't born from escape or comfort. It's born from single-pointed focus, a mind that stops scattering, a mind that learns to stay. Samadhi isn't a mystical trance, it's clarity without clutter. It's what happens when the mind pours all of itself into the present and forgets how to fragment. In daily life, the mind is often pulled in 100 directions. Even in silence, it leaps from memory to worry, from idea to distraction. This is normal, but it's also exhausting, because a divided mind never finds rest. It never fully touches anything. It's always hovering, always scanning, always slightly removed. But samadhi dissolves that distance. It gathers the mind into one place, one breath, one moment, until everything else fades into quiet. This doesn't mean the world disappears. It means the mind stops chasing it. And in that stopping, the noise inside begins to dissolve. Not because the mind has been silenced by force, but because it's become fascinated. The flame of concentration draws attention inward, gently, steadily, until thought loses its power to pull. The training begins simply, with the breath. Noticing the inhale, feeling the exhale, not conceptually, but directly, fully, without splitting. At first, the mind will wander. That's not a problem. The key is to return. Every time it leaves, bring it back. Not with anger, not with shame, but with kindness. The practice is not staying perfectly. The practice is returning again and again until staying becomes natural. Over time, the space between thoughts grows. The distractions lose their stickiness. The mind starts to settle. And what's left is a kind of quiet that doesn't depend on silence. Even in the middle of noise, samadhi holds, like a candle flame in a windless room, bright, still, undisturbed. This concentration isn't forced, it's allowed. It arises naturally when the mind finds something worthy of full attention. In Buddhism, this is often the breath, but it can also be a sound, a mantra, a sensation, anything simple, anything stable. The point isn't the object, the point is the relationship. You don't just look at the breath, you enter it, you let it absorb you until there's nothing left but presence. In this state, thinking slows, emotion quiets, the sense of self begins to dissolve, not in a scary way, but in a freeing one. The boundaries that normally feel so tight, the constant awareness of me, my plans, my story, begin to blur. And in that softening, peace emerges. Not the kind you achieve, but the kind that's revealed when the clutter is gone. Samadhi doesn't ignore the world. It lets the world pass through. You hear the sound, but it doesn't pull. You feel the sensation, but it doesn't disturb. Awareness remains steady, present, unmoved, and this steadiness is healing. It gives the nervous system a rest. It gives the heart a break. It gives the mind space to remember what it's like to be whole. This practice also changes how you move through the day. The deeper the concentration, the more mindful each action becomes. You eat with presence. You speak with care. You walk without rushing. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because your mind is no longer scattered. It's unified. And that unity turns even ordinary moments into meditation. This doesn't mean you lose thoughts forever, but they no longer control you. They no longer seduce you with urgency. You see them come, you see them go, but you don't follow. You don't resist. You just stay. And staying becomes a superpower, because most suffering begins with leaving the moment, leaving the breath, leaving yourself. Samadhi reverses that habit. It brings you back. One of the profound effects of this is how it reshapes perception. Without mental noise, everything becomes clearer, the colors brighter, the sounds crisper, the sensations richer. Even emotions, when they arise, are felt more deeply, but with less pain. Because you're not tangled in them, you're witnessing from stillness, and that witnessing changes everything. In Buddhist teachings, samadhi is one part of a threefold path: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Concentration is the middle, the bridge. Without it, wisdom is intellectual. With it, wisdom becomes experiential. You don't just know that attachment causes suffering. You feel how clinging disrupts your focus. You don't just believe in impermanence. You see how each breath vanishes before you can hold it. The candle flame that doesn't flicker becomes a metaphor for this mind, a mind so stable that nothing can shake it. Not because it's armored, but because it's rooted, because it has nothing to defend, no story to protect, no need to run. It just is. And in that being, truth appears. To deepen this practice, let the breath be your teacher. Let the rhythm lead you, not as a technique, but as a refuge. Every inhale, a return. Every exhale, a letting go. No need to push, no need to grip, just stay with it. Let it draw you inward, past the surface tension of the day, into the quiet core beneath. And if the mind wanders, return. If emotion rises, stay. If thought screams for attention, listen, then come back. The power is in the return. The calm is in the choosing, over and over, until one day, without warning, The mind doesn't leave, it stays, and in that staying, the flame steadies, the storm ends, and the silence that remains is not empty, it's alive. So, samadhi is not the goal, it's the foundation. From this place, compassion flows more freely, decisions are clearer, joy arises more often, not as a result of external things, but as a side effect of inner stillness. You become less reactive, less rigid, more open, more aware. This is why great teachers sit in silence for hours, not because they're escaping life, but because they're touching it more deeply. Not avoiding thought, but resting beneath it. And from that rest comes wisdom. From that stillness comes strength. Not the loud kind, but the kind that stays calm when the whole world shakes. Tonight, let your mind enter this space. Let it be quiet without effort. Let the breath lead you into the center. Let the flame steady itself, not because you force it, but because you no longer disturb it. Let this stillness hold you as you fall asleep. Let it deepen as you rest. Now that the flame of samadhi has steadied and the mind has learned how to rest in unwavering attention, something unexpected is revealed, that silence doesn't require silence, and peace doesn't require stillness in the world. Calm can exist in chaos, not as a contradiction, but as a sanctuary. And that sanctuary isn't found in a remote temple. It's created, breath by breath, from within. This is the monastery of one breath, where simplicity returns not through isolation, but through presence. There is a kind of clarity that emerges when all the extras are stripped away. Not because life became easier, but because the mind stopped adding to it. A monastery has always been a place of stillness, of devotion, of structure that softens the heart and strengthens the spirit. But you don't need stone walls or silence to find this. You only need attention, because one breath, fully felt, fully lived, becomes a temple. Not made of bricks, but of presence. Most people believe peace comes from what surrounds them. A clean room, a quiet house, a soft routine. But that peace is fragile. It depends on what can't be controlled. The noise of the world will return. The demands will rise again. But the breath is always here. It doesn't ask for perfect conditions. It only asks to be felt. Returning to the breath is a return to simplicity. Not the simplicity of doing less, but the simplicity of being here, of dropping the mental commentary, of softening the grip on tasks, on identity, on urgency. It's not a rejection of life, it's a deep embrace of what's most real in it. This inhale, this exhale, nothing added, nothing removed. The mind often complicates things. It adds layers, interpretations, goals. It fills the space between one breath and the next with stories and worries. But when those are allowed to fall away, what remains is pure. It doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to be honest. The breath doesn't lie. It can't pretend. It only reflects what is. In this way, the breath becomes a guide, a teacher, a companion, one that never leaves, never criticizes, never demands, only offers. And the offering is simple: return. Return from thought, return from fear, return from distraction. Come back to this moment, to this body, to this breath. That's all. And in that return, a sacred space opens. This space can be found anywhere, in a crowded subway, in a noisy office, in the middle of a difficult conversation. The breath doesn't need ideal settings to do its work. It only needs attention. And when that attention is steady, the breath becomes a monastery, a place where the world still moves, but you do not, a place where the storm continues, but the center holds. This doesn't mean the breath becomes a hiding place. It becomes a place of power, a place where reaction is paused, where clarity is restored, where choices are made from presence, not panic. It's where you go not to escape life, but to enter it more fully, without the noise, without the spinning, without the endless grasping. This inner monastery can be returned to in seconds. One breath. That's all it takes. One conscious inhale. One slow exhale. Not to achieve anything, but to remember. To remember that peace isn't missing. It's just been covered. And the breath uncovers it. Over time, this practice changes how you relate to discomfort. You no longer need the moment to be pleasant, to be peaceful. Because your peace no longer depends on pleasure, it depends on presence. The breath becomes a friend in fear, a balm in sadness, a grounding in overwhelm. Not by changing the outer world, but by changing how you meet it. The beauty of this practice is its accessibility. You don't need long hours, you don't need the right posture, you don't even need silence. Just attention. Just a willingness to stop fleeing, to stop improving, to stop trying so hard to fix, and instead to feel, to stay, to breathe. This is where healing begins, not in solving everything, but in being with what's here without resistance. The breath teaches this gently. Every inhale opens, every exhale lets go, and together they create a rhythm, a home, a refuge. Monks may live in monasteries of stone, but everyone carries a monastery inside, built from attention, sustained by simplicity, protected by breath, and no one can take it from you. Not noise, not fear, not stress, because it's not outside you. It is you, the part of you that doesn't move, that doesn't rush, that doesn't need anything more than what is. Living this way turns ordinary life into sacred practice. Washing a dish, driving a car, sitting in a waiting room. These become moments of presence, opportunities to return, each one a doorway, each one a chance to pause, breathe, and remember. You are already home. This home can't be broken, can't be burned, can't be stolen, because it was never built from things. It was built from awareness, from stillness, from the willingness to stop running and start listening. And the breath is the key, not just to peace, but to truth. The truth that nothing needs to change for calm to arise. That even in grief, in pressure, in uncertainty, there is a place untouched. A place where the breath moves freely, where the heart opens gently, where the mind bows to now. Let this become your way, a rhythm of return, a habit of quiet noticing, a life lived not in escape, but in intimacy with every breath. That's what the monastery of one breath offers, not a retreat from the world, but a deeper entry into it, fully present, deeply alive, calm in the storm, not because the storm has ended, but because you have stopped chasing shelter outside yourself. From the simplicity of one breath, where calm is created without walls, we arrive at a truth hidden in plain sight. Tension isn't always loud. It's not always in the body. Sometimes it's in the way we think, in how tightly we hold to what we believe should happen, in the grip we have on ideas, people, fears, and outcomes. And just like a hand curled into a fist, that mental grip tires us without rest. Tonight, we unfold that fist, not by force, but by understanding, because in letting go, real relaxation begins. There's a difference between effort and tension. Effort moves, it flows, it adapts. But tension clings, it locks in place. It narrows the field of awareness down to one rigid point. This must happen. This must not change. This must be fixed. These beliefs don't always shout, but they live beneath the surface, driving anxiety, creating pressure, and making peace impossible. Buddhism doesn't say to stop caring. It teaches how to care without clenching. Grasping is subtle. It hides in wanting things to go a certain way. It hides in fear of loss, in the need to control, in the refusal to let moments pass. It shows up in thoughts like, what if this ends? Or, what if I fail? Or, why did they say that? These questions sound normal, but they're tight. They hold, they trap. And the mind, when trapped, can't rest. The path to calm begins by recognizing these little fists of thought, not to shame them, not to fight them, but to see them clearly, to ask gently, is this grasping? And if the answer is yes, then breathe, and loosen, and release. Letting go isn't about losing, it's about choosing peace over pressure. It's the realization that most of what we chase, most of what we hold, is made of thought. It's not solid, it's not final, and even if we held on tighter, it wouldn't guarantee anything. Control doesn't protect, it only exhausts. This doesn't mean giving up. It means softening around what cannot be forced. Life doesn't respond to grasping, it responds to openness. Think of how a tight hand can't receive. It can't hold gently. It can't feel fully. The same is true with the mind. When it's clenched, it can't be touched by life. It only defends. When we relax the mental grip, something new opens. Not apathy, but clarity. Not laziness, but peace. Because when the need to control disappears, energy returns, thought becomes lighter, decisions come easier, emotions pass quicker, and even pain feels less sharp because the resistance is gone. This is the paradox. The more we try to hold on, the more we suffer. But when we release, when we surrender, when we open the fist, we find that nothing was ever fully ours to hold. Not people, not plans, not even peace. These are experiences, not possessions, and when experienced freely, they nourish. When clung to, they drain. Non-grasping doesn't mean indifference. It means intimacy without possession. Being fully present with what's here while letting it change, letting it go, letting it live and die in its own rhythm. This is how nature moves. Trees don't grip their leaves, rivers don't cling to their water, the sky doesn't hold its clouds, and still everything moves beautifully. In your own life, you can begin by noticing the small clenches. The moment you feel annoyed, ask, what am I holding on to? The second you feel stressed, ask, what am I afraid to lose? The instant you feel impatient, ask, what outcome am I forcing? These are the fists, and each one, once noticed, can begin to unfold. Letting go also means releasing self-concepts. Ideas like, I'm the kind of person who, or they always do this to me. These stories create walls. They don't protect the self, they isolate it, and they add pressure to be consistent, to be right, to be approved of. But none of that brings peace. Peace comes from flexibility, from being able to meet each moment without dragging the past into it. The teachings of the Buddha speak often about craving, not just for things, but for identity, for permanence, for certainty. But life is change, it's movement, it's unpredictability, and any attempt to fix it in place is like holding water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the less you hold. Unfolding the mental fist is also how we let go of regret. Regret is just grasping at a different point in time, trying to hold what's already gone. But the past doesn't need to be held. It needs to be honored, learned from, then left behind, like a boat that carried you across but cannot follow you onto the shore. This same softness applies to relationships. Grasping shows up in the need to be understood, to be loved a certain way, to be seen always in the best light. But none of these can be guaranteed. People will see what they see. They will change. They will forget. And when the grip on how they should be is released, love becomes freer, lighter, less about control and more about presence. Even the desire for enlightenment can become a fist, a grasping after spiritual identity, a subtle pressure to be more peaceful, more awake, more detached. But that pressure is just another form of self-making. True peace comes when the seeking softens, when presence becomes enough, when the journey isn't about getting somewhere else, but about letting this moment be enough. Tonight, let the breath show you how. Every inhale fills the hand, every exhale opens it. No pushing, no pulling, just presence. The body knows how to let go. The mind only needs to follow. Letting go is a skill. It takes practice, but each time you do it, you taste a freedom that no possession can offer. The freedom of a mind that is no longer weighed down by needing, by clinging, by proving. And that freedom becomes its own reward, its own quiet joy. From here, everything changes. Not because the world is different, but because the one seeing it is softer, more spacious, less afraid. Now that the fist has opened and the tension of grasping has softened, what remains is space. A quiet kind of space, not filled with goals or answers, but with possibility. And in that space, something unexpected becomes valuable. Not more knowledge, not more plans, not more certainty, but the absence of all those things. Emptiness, not as a void, but as a kind of wisdom, the kind that listens instead of speaks, the kind that receives instead of chases. Tonight, we sit with the image of the empty bowl, not as something waiting to be filled, but as a form of calm in its own right. In Buddhist tradition, the begging bowl is not just a practical object. It's a symbol of the receptive mind. A mind that meets life not with demands, but with openness. The monk walks with a bowl not to take, but to allow, to receive without force, to accept what's offered, and to move on when nothing is. That kind of mind, a bowl held gently, open to whatever comes, is the very foundation of inner peace. The problem is that most minds are not empty bowls. They are already full of assumptions, conclusions, agendas, opinions, full of wanting things to go a certain way, full of reactions already loaded before the moment even begins. And a full bowl cannot receive. It has no space left. So even when peace is offered, when clarity knocks, when insight whispers, the full mind misses it, because there's no room. To practice inner receptivity is to begin emptying, not by force, but by loosening the grip on knowing. It means being okay with not having the answer, being okay with not having a plan, being okay with not being in control, not because those things don't matter, but because the need for them often crowds out the very calm we're looking for. The receptive mind doesn't resist the unknown. It welcomes it. It doesn't fill silence. It listens to it. It doesn't label everything immediately. It lets things unfold. This kind of presence feels strange at first, because the world rewards speed, certainty, cleverness. But in the depth of Buddhist practice, it is the quietest, most humble mind that sees the furthest. This doesn't mean becoming passive. Receptivity is active. It takes awareness. It takes sensitivity. It takes a willingness to stay present with what is, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it doesn't make sense yet. Because some truths don't arrive as explanations. They arrive as silence, as a shift in breath, as a softening of judgment. The empty bowl is also a teacher in humility. To be receptive means admitting you don't know, that you're not always right, that your view might be incomplete. And instead of that being a weakness, it becomes a strength, because the empty bowl can always be filled. The full one cannot. In your own life, this practice starts by watching how quickly the mind moves to conclusions. Someone speaks, and the mind already replies. A problem arises, and the solution rushes in. But what if the answer isn't needed right away? What if waiting, listening, staying open for just a little longer reveals something deeper? This is especially powerful in relationships. Most conflict isn't about what's said. It's about not being heard. When the mind is full of counter-arguments, of judgments, of stories about the other person, there's no room to actually hear them. But when the mind is an empty bowl, they can be received fully. And often, that alone is what heals. This also applies to learning. The deepest insights don't come when you're trying to prove something. They come when you're deeply curious. When you sit with not knowing long enough for a new way of seeing to emerge. And this kind of learning isn't loud. It's quiet. It happens below the surface, in pauses, in stillness, in the willingness to be shaped. The empty bowl is not about abandoning intelligence. It's about balancing it, about creating space between knowing and discovering, about learning how to hold your beliefs loosely enough that they can evolve. This kind of spaciousness is not just intellectual, it's emotional, because when the bowl is empty, there's also more room for compassion, for nuance, for patience. A tight mind says, "I've seen this before." A receptive one says, "Let me see this again, freshly." And in that seeing, things are no longer filtered through assumption. They are met as they are, which is the heart of mindfulness, not just noticing what's happening, but receiving it fully, without coloring it with stories. This openness also changes how you handle struggle. When pain comes, the full mind says, "Why is this happening? How do I fix it?" But the receptive mind says, "This is here." It holds the pain without adding extra tension. It listens to it. It learns from it. And sometimes, in that spacious holding, the pain softens on its own. Even creativity is born from this emptiness. The greatest ideas arise not when the mind is forcing solutions, but when it's resting, walking, showering, breathing. The mind becomes like a clear sky, able to reflect new light. Not because it's brilliant, but because it's clear. This kind of clarity can't be forced. It's invited, and it's invited by presence, by humility, by emptiness. That's why so many monks speak in questions, not answers. Why so many masters say, "Don't know," not because they are confused, but because they are clear enough to let things reveal themselves in their own time. Tonight, let your mind be that bowl. Let it rest without needing to explain. Let it soften its grip on conclusions. Let it become receptive, not just to peace, but to life, to breath, to sensation, to the sound of stillness itself. Because in that quiet, life begins to pour in, not all at once, but slowly, softly, as it always has. And with every breath received, the bowl refills, not with noise, but with clarity, with understanding that arises from silence, with truths that don't need to be spoken to be known. Now that the bowl of the mind has been emptied and presence has softened into receptivity, the next step reveals itself not as a leap, but as a stillness, a deeper kind of stillness, one that holds firm when waves rise, one that does not close, even in discomfort. This is equanimity, not the absence of feeling, but the ability to stay balanced inside it. The mind that becomes like a pond so still, even the winds of emotion pass without leaving ripples. There's a misunderstanding in the world about peace. Many believe it means the absence of emotion, a kind of numbness or detachment. But equanimity is something far more alive. It's not about suppressing what you feel. It's about allowing the full range of emotion without being pulled under. It's about keeping the heart open even when the waters rise. Emotions come in waves. They surge with grief, swell with joy, crash with anger, rise with fear. This is natural. This is human. What creates suffering is not the wave itself, but the mind's reaction to it. The panic to escape, the craving to extend, the fear to feel. Equanimity breaks that cycle. It teaches the body and mind how to stay, not in a rigid way, but in a soft, unwavering way. The way a pond reflects the sky without becoming the storm above it. This training begins by noticing how quickly the mind reacts. When discomfort arises, watch how it tries to explain, to blame, to run. These are habits, well-worn patterns of avoidance or control. But equanimity means sitting beside the emotion and not moving away, watching it fully, without trying to mute or magnify it, letting it exist without taking over. This doesn't mean coldness. In fact, equanimity creates space for warmth. Because you're no longer controlled by emotion, you can meet it with compassion. You can say, "Ah, there is sadness," instead of, "I am broken." You can say, "This is anger," without being consumed by it. You hold it in awareness, just like holding a cup in your hand, not denying it, not dropping it, just seeing it clearly. The pond doesn't resist the rain. It accepts every drop, but it doesn't lose its shape. It doesn't flood in panic. This is the heart of equanimity, inner stability, the ability to experience deeply without falling apart. And the secret to this balance is training, not in silencing emotion, but in learning not to be swept away. You begin by practicing with small moments, a moment of impatience, a flash of annoyance, the tightness before speaking. These are ripples. When you catch them, pause. Don't push them away. Don't feed them either. Just notice. Let them move through without reacting. This is how you build the strength to hold bigger waves when they come. When equanimity deepens, the nervous system responds. You feel less hijacked by surprise, less shaken by judgment, less consumed by praise or criticism, because your center is no longer built on outer conditions. It's grounded in awareness, and awareness, when steady, becomes an unshakable refuge. Equanimity is especially important in relationships. When someone else is emotional, the reactive mind wants to match it or fight it. But the balanced mind listens. It doesn't need to win or fix. It simply stays present. This presence calms not only you, but the other person, because it's rare to be met by a mind that isn't trying to change the moment, but simply receive it. Even in joy, equanimity has value. It allows you to feel fully without clinging, to enjoy deeply without fearing the end. Because equanimity is not indifference, it's intimacy without attachment. It's knowing that everything is welcome and everything will also pass. This doesn't make life dull, it makes life deeper. Emotions become teachers. Anger teaches boundaries. Sadness teaches depth. Fear teaches alertness. Joy teaches connection. But these lessons are only received when you're not running, when the pond remains still enough to reflect. There are practices to cultivate this. Body scans that notice sensations without naming them. Breath awareness that stays steady while feelings rise. Mantras that remind you, this too is a wave. But more than any technique, it's the intention that matters, the willingness to not flee your own experience. Equanimity is also what allows forgiveness. Because when you're not controlled by pain, you can let it soften. When you're not burning with reaction, you can see others more clearly, not through the lens of your hurt, but through the steadiness of presence. In Buddhist texts, equanimity is one of the 4 immeasurables. Alongside loving kindness, compassion, and joy, it completes the heart. Without it, the others wobble. Compassion becomes exhaustion. Joy becomes attachment. Kindness becomes dependency. But equanimity holds it all, grounded, steady, clear. To live this way doesn't mean you won't cry or feel anger or fall apart sometimes. It means you'll know how to return, how to sit quietly with yourself after the storm, how to touch your own heart with still hands, how to be both moved and unmoved. This is why equanimity isn't a skill just for monks. It's for anyone who wants to stop being ruled by emotional weather, anyone who wants to feel without drowning, to care without burning out, to be touched by life but not torn by it. Tonight, let the pond of the mind become still. Let emotion be seen, not as threat or flaw, but as movement, temporary, powerful, but not dangerous to a mind that does not resist. Let the stillness return with each breath, not because the waves stop, but because the surface stops fighting. From the rippleless pond of equanimity, where emotions move without overtaking, we now wade into something deeper, something most avoid, yet all must face. Decay, change, loss. These aren't intrusions in life. They are life. And tonight, we turn toward them not with fear, but with clarity. Because what breaks down also teaches. What ends also reveals. In Buddhism, this is not considered morbid. It's called wisdom. The Dharma of decay is not about resignation. It's about relief. The relief that comes when the mind no longer tries to hold up a world that's designed to shift. Everything in life changes. Bodies age. Friendships evolve. Beliefs transform. Seasons turn. What begins eventually ends. But this isn't a tragedy. It's a rhythm. When the mind accepts that rhythm, something inside lets go. Not in despair, but in softness. Anxiety comes from resisting this truth, from pretending things can be preserved, held perfectly, kept from time. But peace arises when the pretending ends. The mind wants certainty. It builds futures in its head, makes plans to keep things as they are. It resists signs of aging, fears changes in relationships, clings to temporary states. But the effort to stop change is what wears the soul thin. Accepting change doesn't mean liking every moment. It means relaxing the fight against time itself. That's when calm begins to deepen. Impermanence is not just something that happens to the outside world. It happens inside too. Thoughts fade, emotions shift, desires rise and fall, identity itself transforms. When seen clearly, this is freeing. Because if everything is always changing, then no experience, no matter how intense, can trap you. Suffering loses its permanence. So does fear. So does sadness. This realization brings peace, not by promising things will stay good, but by showing that nothing stays stuck. Even pain moves. Even confusion softens. The moment the mind stops bracing against decay, the grip loosens. And in that looseness, space opens. A breath deeper than control. A calm untouched by outcome. The body is a teacher of this. With every breath, cells change, muscles tighten and release, skin weathers, hair grays. Trying to stop it is like trying to hold back the tide. But when you bow to the body's impermanence, it becomes sacred. Not because it lasts, but because it's fleeting. Every breath is a gift that won't repeat. Every heartbeat is a reminder to be here now, because this exact version of now won't come again. The Dharma of decay is not about giving up. It's about letting go of the illusion that anything was ever meant to be permanent. And that includes emotional states. No feeling is final. Not even the ones that feel endless. Depression passes. Anxiety fades. Even numbness shifts eventually. Time, when allowed to move freely, carries everything with it, including the weight you thought would never lift. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means responding without attachment, showing up fully even as things dissolve, loving deeply even knowing that what you love will change, living with presence, not because it guarantees comfort, but because it honors the truth. Death, too, is part of this teaching. Not just physical death, but the smaller deaths that happen every day. The ending of a chapter, the letting go of an identity, the realization that something once important is no longer needed. These losses can feel like failure, but they are transformation in motion. And when met with stillness, they reveal a deeper layer of life, one where the heart is open not because it is untouched, but because it has softened through letting go. This softness is power. It allows you to move through endings without shutting down, to face uncertainty without collapsing, to meet loss without bitterness, and to hold gratitude for what was, even as it becomes what no longer is. Nature shows this constantly. Leaves fall, fruit rots, mountains erode. But there is no panic in it, no clinging, just change. And somehow, beauty rises in that. A flower that lasts a single day is still worth watching. A sunset that fades in minutes still moves the soul. Not despite its impermanence, but because of it. So, the practice becomes one of remembering. When fear arises, remember, this too will pass. When joy comes, don't try to trap it. Taste it fully, then let it go. When something breaks, don't panic. See what space it clears. When something ends, ask gently, what now begins? Because in Buddhism, nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. This view doesn't erase grief, but it reshapes it. It lets you feel it without being crushed by it. To cry and then breathe. To mourn and then rest. Grief becomes not a wall, but a doorway, a movement, a process. And the more you trust that, the more you heal, not instantly, not neatly, but honestly. Even identity is touched by this. Who you are today is not who you were last year or last week. The mind changes, the heart evolves, what mattered changes. This isn't instability, it's growth. And the more the mind stops clinging to who it thinks it is, the more space there is for becoming. The Dharma of decay also helps with forgiveness, because when you see how much changes in you, it becomes easier to allow that others can change too, that mistakes can fade, that wounds can heal, that nothing is frozen. This isn't wishful thinking, it's the recognition that the same law touching your own life is touching every life. Tonight, let this truth calm you. Let go of the effort to hold it all together. Let things fall where they may. Let time shape what it needs to shape. Let old versions of yourself soften into silence. Let peace rise not from control, but from trust. Because when the heart trusts the nature of change, it no longer resists its own unfolding. From the quiet acceptance of life's natural breakdowns, where the mind stops bracing against change, we now turn to something just as powerful but far more subtle, the nature of thought itself. Because what stirs inside us isn't always as fresh or as true as it feels. In fact, most thoughts aren't present moment truths. They're echoes, delayed responses, leftover signals from something that's already passed. And once this is clearly seen, a new layer of freedom opens, because the noise of the mind loses its urgency the moment it's recognized as old sound. Thoughts come fast, and they come dressed as facts. They comment, they predict, they narrate. And most people, without question, believe them. But the mind isn't a real-time instrument. It's reactive. It filters, interprets, delays. What you think you're experiencing now is often just the mind catching up, offering an explanation, a judgment, a conclusion. But explanations are not experiences. And when that delay is seen, the grip of thought loosens. A thought might say, "This is too much," but the actual moment might be quiet. The thought might scream, "I've failed," while the body is simply resting. It might replay an argument that happened hours ago, or rehearse one that hasn't even occurred. These are not truths. They are recordings, echoes of emotional waves, bouncing around long after the wave has passed. This doesn't make thought the enemy. It makes it something to observe more gently, more skeptically. Like hearing a voice in a cave. You don't run because of the sound. You recognize it's delayed, distorted, shaped by the space it's moving through. The mind works in a similar way. It processes based on history, on patterns, on fear, on desire. But none of that makes what it says a reliable mirror of the moment. This is why so many thoughts are repetitive. The mind isn't inventing, it's recycling, replaying memories, reinforcing old stories, repeating interpretations. This isn't because the mind is flawed, it's because it's conditioned, designed to protect, to predict, to prepare. But those functions often overshoot the present. They color it with worry. They drown it in judgment. They blur it with past pain. Buddhism doesn't ask you to stop thinking. It invites you to question the automatic belief in thought. To pause long enough to ask, is this thought a reflection of now or an echo of then? And most of the time, you'll find it's the latter. This gap between mind and moment is where awareness enters, and awareness is what turns noise into insight. When this becomes a practice, something shifts. The reaction time slows, not because you're suppressing thought, but because you're not obeying it instantly. A thought arises, and instead of acting on it, you watch. You notice how it changes, how it fades, how the emotion that came with it softens just by being seen. That's how the grip of mental noise begins to release, not by silence, but by space. This space reveals another truth. Just because a thought is loud doesn't mean it's important. Just because it's persistent doesn't mean it's true. The mind often yells when it's uncertain. It repeats when it's afraid. It demands when it feels ignored. But presence doesn't need to yell. Presence is quiet. And the more attention shifts from thought to now, the clearer that quiet becomes. Emotional echoes are especially strong. A comment someone made years ago still rattles around. A mistake still haunts, not because it's still happening, but because the echo hasn't faded. These are the loops that keep people stuck, not because they're trapped in events, but because they're trapped in delayed thoughts about the events. And recognizing the delay breaks the spell. You can even see this in physical reactions. The body tenses before the mind names the reason. The stomach knots before the thought arrives. This shows that experience happens first, interpretation second, and often the interpretation is inaccurate. It's a guess, a story. And once you see that story forming in slow motion, you can let it pass like weather. This doesn't mean ignoring thought. It means engaging it differently, with softness, with curiosity. You ask not, what does this thought want me to do? But where did this thought come from? And often it comes from habit, from the past, from fear trying to wear the mask of logic. But you don't have to believe every mask. This approach also helps in conversation. Instead of reacting to what's said, you notice the thoughts that arise. You let the initial reaction pass. You respond from clarity instead of from echo. This is how communication becomes clearer, less defensive, more grounded. Meditation helps sharpen this awareness, not by stopping thought, but by making the delay visible. You sit and the mind rushes. But over time, you see the waves come later than the breath. You feel the difference between a direct sensation and the mind's commentary about it. And in that noticing, peace begins, because you realize the moment doesn't need to be fixed, it needs to be felt. Thoughts as echoes also explain why people sometimes feel anxious for no reason. The original cause has passed, but the mind hasn't caught up. It's still playing the old sound, and without awareness, you believe the anxiety must be about now. But it's not. It's a residue, a lag, and once seen, it can be released. The more you see thoughts this way, the more compassion arises for yourself, for others, because you understand that most of what people say and do isn't about now, it's about then. They're reacting to echoes, just like you sometimes are, and when that's clear, forgiveness comes easier, so does patience. Tonight, as thoughts arise, notice their tone. Are they speaking about what's in front of you, or something that already passed? Are they responding to the present, or rehashing the past? Let each one rise, echo, and fall. Don't stop them, don't chase them, just let the echo fade on its own. That's how the signal becomes clearer. That's how silence grows, not from silence itself, but from not following the noise. From the moment we recognize thoughts as echoes, delayed, reactive, often outdated, the mind began to soften its grip. It became clear that not everything that rises within deserves attention, and not all mental noise is real-time truth. But now, an even subtler shift calls us forward. Beneath the thoughts, between the words, within the silence they leave behind, there is something else. Not empty space, but living stillness. And in that stillness, the deepest kind of peace begins. It doesn't come through more thinking. It comes through learning how to listen to what isn't said. There's a space that exists between thoughts, just as it does between spoken words. Most never notice it, because the mind is trained to chase meaning, to analyze content, to stay active. But peace is never found in the noise. It's found in the pause before the next thought arrives. It's found in the quiet that holds every word like sky holds clouds. When that quiet is touched, the mind rests, not because it has solved anything, but because it has remembered something simpler than solving: being. This practice is not about removing thought. It's about shifting where attention goes. Instead of clinging to the content of thoughts, you begin to rest in the space around them. Like noticing the silence before a bell rings, the quiet that holds the sound, the stillness between heartbeats. This isn't conceptual. It's direct, it's subtle, and it's life-changing once recognized. The mind moves fast because it believes thinking is survival. It jumps from one point to the next, filling space with explanations and plans and judgments. But none of that brings real rest. Rest begins in the pause, not because the pause is blank, but because it's full in a different way, full of presence, full of depth, full of awareness that isn't chasing anything. You can begin this practice by listening, not to music, not to voices, but to silence itself. Sit for a moment and notice where sound stops, not just the absence of noise, but the quality of the stillness underneath. That stillness isn't passive, it's alert, it's alive. And the more you tune into it, the more the mind stops racing to fill it. This is the same with mental silence. You're thinking, and then a gap appears, a few seconds with no words. Most people miss it, but that gap is the doorway. It's the place where you stop being a thinker and start being awareness itself. Thought is loud, presence is quiet, but quiet is not empty. It's complete in a different way. Words are tools, but space is the canvas. Without it, nothing can be seen clearly. When the mind lives only in words, it becomes like a song with no pauses, constant noise, no rhythm, no beauty. But when it begins to feel the space between notes, it starts to understand music, not just sound. That's what this practice invites. not just more inner dialogue, but awareness of the silence that gives thought its meaning. In conversation, this shows up as pausing before speaking, not rushing to respond, letting the silence hold what was said. This allows understanding to deepen. It makes room for insight, for empathy, and more importantly, it allows both people to connect without filling every second with noise. That's what makes silence powerful, not as absence, but as presence. Mental gaps can also be felt during meditation. You sit and thoughts move. One arises, then another. But between them, there's a split second of nothing, not unconsciousness, awareness without content. Stay there, not by force, but by noticing, by choosing not to follow the next thought. That's how the space grows. It becomes familiar. It becomes safe. The reason most people avoid silence is because it feels unfamiliar. But silence isn't empty. It's just different. It doesn't entertain. It doesn't perform, but it soothes something older than words. The nervous system responds. The breath slows. The chest softens. Not because of anything said, but because of what's allowed to be unsaid. In this space, healing begins, because without constant thought, pain starts to unravel, tension unwinds. There's no pressure to fix, to explain, to label. Just being, just presence. And in that presence, the heart speaks, not loudly, not with words, but with a knowing that doesn't need translation. Listening to mental space also trains patience, because you're no longer filling every gap. You're waiting, you're allowing, you're being still long enough to see what arises naturally rather than what the mind tries to force. And in that stillness, deeper truths emerge, not ones created by thinking, but ones revealed by silence. This is also where creativity is born. The greatest ideas come from stillness, not from constant thinking. The mind needs space to receive, to imagine, to reframe. But it can't receive if it's always speaking. Silence becomes the soil where insight grows, not by demand, but by invitation. You don't need to meditate for hours to feel this. Just pause after a sentence. Breathe after a thought. Notice the gap between inhale and exhale. These are all doorways. They don't lead to more doing. They lead to presence. And the more often you walk through them, the more natural they become. Eventually, life itself starts to slow down. Not because time changes, but because you're no longer rushing to fill it. You're resting inside it. You're listening to its rhythm. And life has a rhythm far more peaceful than the mind usually allows. This isn't escapism, it's deeper engagement. Silence doesn't mean retreating from life. It means entering it fully, without distraction, without distortion. You meet the moment as it is, not dressed in ideas, but bare and whole. That kind of meeting changes you. It calms not by dulling the senses, but by refining them. And from this refinement, clarity arises. Decisions become easier. Reactions soften. Relationships deepen. Not because you've done more, but because you've spoken less, thought less, and listened more, to the space, to the breath, to the quiet voice underneath the noise. Tonight, let that voice rise, not with volume, but with presence. Let each breath be heard, not just the inhale and exhale, but the pause in between. Let the silence between thoughts become a refuge, not because it hides you, but because it reveals you. From the quiet between thoughts, where stillness begins to hold its own shape, a new kind of strength starts to reveal itself. Not the strength of pushing harder or staying rigid, not the discipline of cold routines or forced silence, but something deeper, quieter, and more sustainable. Discipline that doesn't hurt, structure that doesn't choke. This is the path of the gentle warrior, the one who moves with compassion instead of control, and in doing so discovers a calm that doesn't break under pressure. The mind has long been taught to obey through force, to be disciplined by guilt, to be controlled by harshness. Wake up earlier, do more, don't feel, push harder. And while these methods might produce results, they rarely produce peace. They leave behind a tightness, a constant inner pressure, a belief that worth must be earned through struggle. But the gentle warrior trains differently, not by yelling at the mind, but by guiding it with care, not by punishing failure, but by patiently returning again and again to the path. Discipline, when rooted in compassion, becomes devotion. It stops being a fight and starts becoming a rhythm, not something you must do, but something you choose because you see how it nourishes your calm. This kind of discipline doesn't come from fear of failure. It comes from love for clarity. It's the quiet decision to show up for yourself, not perfectly, but consistently. The gentle warrior wakes not to beat the world, but to meet it. Their morning sits in stillness, not because it's required, but because it reminds them who they are beneath the noise. Their movements are not rushed. Their words are not wasted. They do not sprint through life to prove their value. They move with presence because that's where peace lives. This path doesn't reject structure. It reclaims it. It sees routine not as a prison, but as a frame that holds something sacred. A morning walk, a moment of silence before meals, a pause before replying. These aren't rigid rules. They're gentle rituals. They hold space for awareness to bloom, and in that awareness, the mind stops spinning. Compassionate discipline also changes how you handle your own emotions. When the mind is wild, the harsh inner voice wants to shout it down. You shouldn't feel that. You're failing again. But the gentle warrior listens. They don't believe everything the mind says, but they don't attack it either. They guide it back with patience, with breath, with steady steps. This doesn't mean softness becomes laziness. The gentle warrior is committed, but their commitment is clean. It's not driven by shame. It's not fueled by the need to prove. It's rooted in understanding. They've seen what happens when the mind is left untrained, how it creates suffering, how it clings, how it panics. So they stay with the practice, not to earn peace, but to return to it. Mindful discipline is also forgiving. When you miss a day, it doesn't spiral into failure. When the mind wanders, it's not punished. It's noticed and returned. This return is the practice. It's not about perfect attendance. It's about constant willingness. That's how calm becomes stable. Not through control, but through compassion that never leaves. This approach also shifts how you treat others. When you no longer demand perfection from yourself, you stop demanding it from them. You understand that everyone is trying, everyone is learning, everyone forgets, and everyone returns. This creates space in your relationships. Patience grows, tension fades, because you've stopped using force as your primary tool. Even productivity changes. You still get things done, but you don't grind your spirit down to do it. You rest when tired. You move when ready. You focus not because you must, but because your mind has learned how to stay. This is a different kind of power. It doesn't flash, it doesn't dominate, but it lasts. The gentle warrior also knows how to say no. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Not because of rules, but because of alignment. They choose what nourishes their inner stillness and let go of what disturbs it. And in doing so, their life becomes simpler, not smaller, but more deliberate. Each action flows from awareness, not urgency. There's a strength in this that most people miss. A quiet resolve, a silent discipline. You won't always see it on the surface, but it's there in the way they breathe through difficulty, in the way they return to the mat, even when distracted, in the way they speak kindly to themselves after a setback. That's the warrior in them, not the fighter, but the one who never stops returning to the present. Over time, this kind of discipline shapes the nervous system. The body stops bracing all the time. The mind stops fearing stillness. The heart softens into a rhythm of care, not because everything is easy, but because the relationship with challenge has changed. It's no longer about domination, it's about devotion. This discipline is taught in every breath. Every time you sit, even when distracted. Every time you pause instead of react. Every time you hold space for silence instead of filling it with noise. Each moment becomes a training. Each return becomes a muscle. And over time, your mind becomes steady. Not silent all the time, but quiet enough to listen, calm enough to choose. Tonight, let your discipline be gentle. Let it guide you back without judgment. Let it walk beside you instead of dragging you forward. Let your strength come not from how loud you are, but from how soft you remain when everything else gets loud. From the quiet power of compassionate discipline, where force is replaced by presence, we now enter the smallest movements of daily life, the ones most overlooked, the ones that often pass in a blur. This is where practice deepens, not in grand efforts, but in subtle choices. And one of those choices is attention. Not just focused effort, but a soft, continuous attention that flows through everything. This is the tea ceremony of attention, a way of turning life itself into meditation, not through retreat, but through the way you touch each moment. There is something sacred in simplicity, not because it's dramatic or profound, but because it's fully lived. The act of making tea becomes a doorway, not for tea's sake, but for what it reveals about the quality of awareness behind every motion. You fill the kettle, you wait, you pour, you hold the cup. And if attention is fully present, each step becomes rich. Time slows, the senses awaken, and the mind, which is used to rushing, begins to soften. This isn't about doing something unusual, it's about doing the usual in an unusual way, with presence, with care, with stillness behind the movement. It's not the task that transforms you, it's how you do it. The same could be said for washing a dish, folding laundry, putting on shoes. Any act, when met with full awareness, becomes a form of stillness. The tea ceremony is a metaphor for this way of living. Every step is intentional, not rushed, not mindless. It invites a kind of rhythm that pulls you back from the storm of overthinking and into the simplicity of now. When the hand moves slowly, the mind follows. When the cup is held with care, the heart steadies. When no part of the process is skipped over, life stops being something to get through. It becomes something to be with. This is how calm becomes a lifestyle, not just a meditation goal. When attention infuses daily life, the nervous system finds regulation not just during practice, but between practices. The mind stops bouncing between tasks and starts moving with them. The body stops bracing against the next thing and begins to soften into the one you're already doing. Even the breath changes. During these small acts of attention, the breath naturally deepens. The heart rate slows. The chatter of the mind dims, not because you forced it to, but because it no longer has momentum. This is the power of deliberate attention. It doesn't push the mind away, it gently leads it home. The most important part of this practice is remembering. Noticing when you're lost in distraction, and then gently returning to the present act. That return is everything. That's the whole path. Whether you're holding a teacup or tying your shoelace or closing a door, it's not about the act. It's about the quality of mind you bring to it. Are you there? Or are you rushing ahead? Are you feeling what's in your hands? Or are you stuck in thought? This doesn't mean every moment will be deep. Some will be dull. Some will be noisy. Some will come with frustration or fatigue. But even those moments can be met with attention. You don't need peace to practice. You practice to find peace. And sometimes the practice is simply being aware that you're distracted and staying kind to yourself as you return. Attention is not force, it's invitation. It says, "Come back, this moment is enough." And that message, repeated throughout the day, becomes a kind of healing. You stop chasing intensity and start trusting presence. You stop needing special circumstances and start finding the sacred in what's already here. This way of living also builds resilience. Because when life gets messy, the habit of attention holds you. The mind doesn't spiral as fast. The breath stays more steady. The body feels safer. Not because you're controlling everything, but because you're with it, fully. And that witness is grounding. When tea becomes meditation, so does everything else. Eating becomes slower. Walking becomes quieter. Conversations become deeper, not because of what's said, but because you're fully there to listen. Distractions will still come, but they lose their grip. You've trained yourself to return, to pause, to feel. Even boredom transforms. What once felt dull becomes rich. What once felt repetitive becomes a rhythm. Attention reveals texture in everything. Warm water on your hands, the weight of a cup, the sound of breath through your nose. None of it is spectacular, but all of it is alive. And being with that aliveness is the beginning of true contentment. This practice also nourishes gratitude. When you're present with what you do, you start to appreciate it. Not as a concept, but as a felt sense. Gratitude isn't always a big feeling. Sometimes it's the quiet thankfulness that comes from being here fully, from tasting your tea, from hearing your footsteps, from feeling your heartbeat. Over time, attention becomes less about effort and more about flavor. It becomes the way you season your life, the way you meet each moment with care, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. That's where calm is built, not from what's happening, but from how fully you are with it. Tonight, let this be your ceremony. Whatever you're doing, even now, listening, can be the bowl, the teacup, the breath, the anchor. Let your mind rest not in silence, but in softness. Let your actions be gentle. Let your pace be slow enough to feel what's really happening. From the soft practice of infusing daily life with attention, where even tea becomes a path to presence, the mind begins to reveal its deeper patterns. And one of the clearest patterns, once you're quiet enough to notice it, is the loop, the replay. The thought that arrives not because it belongs to the moment, but because it hasn't been released from the past. These are ghost thoughts, not real in the present, but haunting all the same. They echo without roots, and the more they're believed, the more the present becomes a shadow of what's already over. There is a moment in practice when this becomes obvious. You're sitting in silence or moving through your day, and suddenly the mind brings back an old scene, a mistake, a memory, a conversation that ended years ago, and for a second it feels urgent. But when you look closely, you realize this isn't now. It's a ghost, and it only has power if you follow it. Ghost thoughts are sticky because they arrive with emotion. They wear the tone of guilt, anger, sadness, or fear. That's how they slip past unnoticed, because the feeling makes them seem true. But they're not new. They're echoes, mental recordings on repeat. They didn't rise from this moment. They rose from the residue of moments you haven't finished letting go. Buddhism teaches that the mind clings, not just to pleasure or identity, but to pain. Not because it enjoys it, but because it thinks it still needs it. That somehow, by revisiting the hurt, safety will be created. That reviewing the failure will prevent it from happening again. But this is a misunderstanding. The mind's repetition is not always wisdom. Often it's habit, and habits can be changed when seen clearly. Recognizing ghost thoughts starts with awareness. When a familiar loop arises, pause. Ask yourself, is this happening, or has it already happened? Does this thought belong to this breath? Or am I rehearsing something that isn't even here? That moment of questioning creates space. And in that space, the loop can lose its grip. It's also important to understand that these thoughts aren't your fault. They're the mind doing what it's trained to do: protect, prepare, process. But left unchecked, they stop protecting and start poisoning. They whisper things like, "You should have known better," or "They were wrong and you never got closure." But these whispers don't serve you. They trap you in cycles that have no present tense resolution. Ghost thoughts thrive in silence unless that silence is conscious. They need unawareness to survive. But when the light of mindfulness shines on them, they begin to dissolve. Not because you forced them out, but because they can't stand in the truth of the present moment. They lose power when you stop arguing with them, when you stop replaying them, when you stop making them real again by feeding them your attention. You don't have to fight them. Fighting gives them energy. You observe them. You say, "Ah, this again," and you return to breath, to body, to sound, to now, and they pass. Not because you won, but because you stopped feeding the echo. This practice becomes easier over time. You start to recognize the flavor of certain thoughts. You feel the familiar tug of an old story and know it's just that, a story. You don't need to rewrite it. You just stop rereading it. And when new pain arises, because it will, you meet it differently. You allow it, feel it, move through it fully, so it doesn't turn into another ghost. You process in real time. You cry when the moment calls for it. You speak when the truth is ready. You don't bury it, because what's buried becomes a haunting. What's felt becomes released. Many people live surrounded by these ghosts, unknowingly dragging the past into every room, every relationship, every decision. Not because they want to, But because they never learned to recognize the repetition, they confuse familiar pain with current truth. But they're not the same. When you learn to recognize this, your internal space clears. The mind becomes lighter. Emotions no longer stack on top of each other. You begin to experience now as it is, not as a filter through yesterday. This changes how you respond to others. You stop assuming every tone is personal. You stop projecting old wounds onto new faces. You stop carrying other people's voices in your mind as if they still belong there. Not because you suppress them, but because you've honored them and let them go. Ghost thoughts often return during stillness, not because stillness creates them, but because stillness reveals them. And that's a gift, because only what is seen can be released. You begin to notice your mind looping a conversation from 10 years ago and realize it's not a sign of something wrong. It's a call to return, to now, to the truth that there is nothing left to fix in that moment, because that moment no longer exists. Even your identity can be shaped by ghost thoughts. I'm not someone who, or I always mess up when. These aren't truths. They're memories disguised as rules, and when those memories are no longer fed, identity becomes freer. You stop being the sum of what happened. You start being the sum of what's aware. Tonight, let this be your practice. Not to chase away the ghosts, just to see them clearly. To notice what arises and ask gently, is this a visitor from now or a shadow from before? If it's a shadow, you don't need to banish it. You just stop walking into it. You let it float past like smoke, like wind through an open window. Now that ghost thoughts have been seen for what they are, echoes of what's already passed, the mind begins to breathe again, lighter, less entangled. But beneath even those repetitive loops lies something deeper, something quieter, yet far more influential. The constant story of me. The identity that forms like a sand mandala, each grain carefully shaped by memory, emotion, culture, fear, desire. And like a mandala, it's intricate, beautiful, but not built to last. Tonight we walk into that design, not to destroy it, but to let it dissolve. Not out of loss, but to find peace beneath the image of who we think we are. Most of what we believe about ourselves didn't start with us. It was given, repeated, shaped, over years, through words from parents, expectations from society, reactions to praise or pain, and slowly those impressions solidified. I'm the anxious one. I'm the strong one. I always mess this up. I never finish what I start. These labels became identity, and identity became habit. But the danger isn't just in the label, it's in the belief that it's permanent. Fixed identity creates tension, because it tries to freeze something that is always moving. The mind, like everything else, is fluid. But when it believes this is just who I am, it builds walls. And those walls become prisons. They resist change. They fear being challenged. They defend instead of soften. And over time, that defense becomes exhaustion. Buddhism doesn't teach you to become someone better. It invites you to see there was never someone fixed at all, just sensations, thoughts, tendencies, shifting like wind patterns, flowing like rivers. No solid self, only the illusion of one, formed by repetition and reinforced by clinging. When this is seen clearly, something incredible happens. The pressure to always be yourself begins to ease. You stop performing for an imaginary audience. You stop protecting an image that doesn't need to be real. And peace rushes in. Not because you've become more, but because you've let go of needing to be anything specific at all. This doesn't make you empty. It makes you spacious. Without a fixed identity to guard, you become more present, more flexible, more honest, not trying to match a story, but responding to what's real. You don't have to be the calm one. You don't have to be the broken one. You just are what's true in this moment. And that truth can change, breath by breath. The metaphor of the sand mandala helps here. In Tibetan tradition, monks spend hours, sometimes days, crafting a mandala from colored grains of sand, intricate, beautiful. And when it's finished, they sweep it away, not in sadness, in understanding that nothing is meant to stay, that beauty can exist without attachment, that peace comes not from preservation, but from participation. Your identity is like that. Something shaped over time, something that can be appreciated, but also something that must be allowed to shift. The person you were a year ago is gone. The version of you from childhood doesn't exist. Even who you were this morning has changed slightly. The illusion is thinking that a single version of you has ever been the full truth. This insight is not meant to destabilize, it's meant to liberate. Because when the self isn't fixed, growth becomes natural. You're not betraying yourself when you evolve. You're not being fake when you change. You're responding to the present with a mind that's no longer locked in old blueprints. Even emotions are shaped by identity. If you believe, I'm an angry person, anger becomes expected. If you believe, I'm weak, fear becomes familiar. But these are roles, not facts. They are chapters, not the whole book. And when the mind no longer clings to a single storyline, new responses can emerge. Gentler ones, wiser ones. This also changes how we relate to others. When you no longer fix your own identity, you stop fixing theirs. You stop seeing people as static labels, the difficult one, the selfish one, the one who always disappoints. And in that softening, compassion grows, not as a practice, but as a byproduct of seeing others as fluid too. Letting identity dissolve doesn't mean losing boundaries. It means letting those boundaries be shaped by presence, not by old definitions. You can still say no, you can still walk away, but not from ego, from clarity, not to defend who you think you are, but to care for what's truly unfolding. This fluidity also brings creativity. When you're not trying to stay consistent, you can try new things. You can surprise yourself. You can fail without it being a personal crisis. You can learn faster because you're not protecting your image, you're nurturing your growth. It also brings ease to transitions. Endings hurt less. Beginnings feel less pressured. Because you're not dragging a heavy self through every door. You're moving lightly. You're letting the story breathe. You're seeing each day as part of the mandala, not the final version, but one part of a living design that's meant to shift. Meditation reveals this gently. Sit long enough and you'll see it. How the sense of me flickers, how it tightens with thought, how it relaxes with breath. Some moments it vanishes entirely, and what remains is not absence. It's peace. A presence without label, a quiet without border, a mind without armor. In this space, fear also loses its edge. Because most fear is about the self. Fear of being hurt. Fear of being seen. Fear of being not enough. But when the self is not held so tightly, those fears don't stick. They pass through like wind through open windows, not because you are detached, but because you are no longer holding anything too tightly. Tonight, let your story be sand. Let it fall, let it scatter, not as erasure, but as freedom. You are not the one you were yesterday. You are not the one your thoughts describe. You are not your pain. You are not your past. You are something softer, something closer to the breath than to the name. From the soft release of identity, where the self no longer clings to labels or stories, something deeper and more primal begins to call, not from within the mind, but from outside it, from the body, from the earth, from the spaces where thinking fades and rhythm speaks. This rhythm has no words, but it has a language the nervous system remembers. Tonight, we breathe not to control the body, but to rejoin it with the world. We learn to breathe with trees, slowly, fully, quietly, and in doing so, we begin to calm not just the mind, but the whole system that holds it. There is something about trees that steadies the nervous system before a single thought appears. Their stillness speaks to a different kind of intelligence. Their movement, guided only by wind, sun, and time, invites a slower rhythm, one that has no urgency, no resistance, no performance. And this rhythm is not separate from you. It's the rhythm your breath knew before it was trained to rush. The nervous system responds to rhythm more deeply than words. Breath is its first language, and when breath becomes fast and shallow, the body enters alert mode. Even without danger, the mind begins to scan, muscles tighten, thought becomes more rigid, but when breath slows, the signal changes. Safety returns, presence reawakens, and one of the most effective ways to remember that slow breath is to watch nature, because it has never forgotten. When you watch the branches of a tree rise and fall, or the leaves move in waves, or the grass sway with wind, you begin to sense a rhythm beneath it all. It's not mechanical. It's not forced. It's slow, but it's alive. The same rhythm exists in your body, but stress, noise, and overstimulation pull you out of it. And every time you return, it's not a correction. It's a reunion. Breathing with trees is not about copying their form. It's about matching their pace, feeling how long it takes for a branch to rise and letting your inhale rise with it, not to manipulate breath, but to extend it naturally, letting your exhale drop with the wind, letting the rhythm of earth remind the rhythm of body how to slow down. This isn't visualization, it's entrainment, a biological process where systems sync. Just like clocks placed near each other eventually align, your nervous system begins to align with the environment around it. This is why spending time in nature is healing, not because of what you do there, but because of what you stop doing. You stop rushing, you stop bracing, you stop performing, and the breath returns to its original intelligence. As this rhythm returns, the mind begins to soften, because thought is influenced by breath. When breath is calm, thought follows. When breath is steady, reactivity fades. And over time, this becomes less a practice and more a default. You start living from a slower baseline, a quieter home frequency, one where the body feels safe and the mind stops scanning for threats. Trees don't rush, they don't overcorrect, they don't seek perfection, they respond to what's here. If there is wind, they move. If there is sun, they open. If there is darkness, they rest. This is wisdom in motion, and this same wisdom lives in you. It's just been covered by thought, by habits, by speed. Letting yourself breathe with trees isn't about escaping life. It's about syncing with a rhythm that holds all of life. One that includes joy and sorrow, light and shadow. One that doesn't panic when things shift because it knows how to adapt, how to return, how to root. This practice can be done anywhere nature exists. Sit by a tree, stand by a river, walk through a field. Don't try to meditate. Just watch. Just feel. Just breathe. Let the body find its rhythm again. Let the breath extend without counting. Let the eyes soften. Let the skin listen to wind. Let the muscles drop what they don't need. Even in a city, this can be felt. One tree is enough. One patch of sky. One moment of sun on your hands. You don't need silence. You don't need distance. You just need presence. Because rhythm doesn't depend on place. It depends on attention. This is not a technique to fix something. It's a way of returning to what isn't broken. You are not training your breath. You are untraining the habits that pulled it out of harmony. And when that harmony returns, something very old inside you relaxes. A kind of remembering, a kind of homecoming. Over time, this changes your emotional life. Emotions rise and fall, but they don't flood. You feel sadness without collapse. You feel joy without clinging, because your breath has taught your body that waves are safe, that rhythm can hold pain, that calm is not the absence of feeling, but the container that holds it gently. You also begin to feel time differently. When synced with natural rhythm, minutes stretch, hours soften. There is more space between events, less rush, more breath between words, more presence between tasks. Life stops feeling like something to catch up with and starts feeling like something to move inside of. This movement is not linear, it's seasonal. Like trees, your energy changes, your focus shifts, and when you honor that cycle, you stop forcing productivity. You rest when it's time to rest. You act when it's time to act. And your nervous system thanks you by staying more regulated, more balanced, more capable of presence. This practice also changes how you relate to others. You stop matching their anxiety. You stop rushing their silence. You hold space like a tree holds shadow, without needing to fix, without rushing to speak. Your calm becomes contagious, not because you try, but because your breath teaches others how to slow down too. Let this be your practice tonight. Not deep breath, not forced breath, just natural rhythm. Inhale like the leaf rises, exhale like the branch lowers. Let nature become the metronome. Let stillness become the teacher. Let every breath become a reunion with a pace that brings peace. Now that the breath has been returned to its natural rhythm, guided not by effort but by the slow movement of trees, something deeper starts to settle. A calm that doesn't come from doing less, but from needing less. The nervous system no longer scrambles to keep up. The mind no longer needs to justify every moment. There is a silence forming, not just between thoughts, but inside desire itself. And in that space, another truth becomes clear. Peace isn't found by getting more. It begins when you realize you already have enough. This is the robe of enough, the heart of Buddhist simplicity, and the end of restless wanting. Restlessness is born from the belief that something is missing. the mind reaches out for more comfort, more success, more attention, more understanding. But each time it grasps, the moment is left behind. The more it chases, the less it rests. And slowly, without noticing, peace is pushed further away, not by suffering, but by wanting. In Buddhist tradition, monks wear a robe that symbolizes simplicity. It is not just clothing, it is a statement, a reminder. It represents the letting go of excess, of clutter, of complication. And although most people won't wear such a robe, the invitation is the same, to live in a way that says, "This is enough." Not as resignation, but as freedom. The robe of enough isn't made of fabric. It's made of choices, of not needing to prove, of not always searching, of not turning every moment into a stepping stone to the next. It's woven from contentment, from the courage to be still in what is already here, and from the clarity to see how much energy is lost to wanting. The world encourages constant hunger, for upgrades, for answers, for recognition. And while wanting is human, endless wanting is suffering. It fragments the mind. It fills quiet moments with tension. It turns life into a race that never finishes. But when simplicity is embraced, not as minimalism for aesthetics, but as presence over possession, space returns, thought slows, breath deepens, and the heart feels lighter. Living simply doesn't mean giving everything away. It means not giving your peace away to things that don't matter. It means choosing what serves your clarity over what feeds your craving. It means saying yes with care, saying no with ease. It means knowing when enough has been reached, not because there's nothing left to want, but because more won't bring more peace. You begin to notice this in small ways, when one cup is enough, when one response is enough, when one breath is enough. And that enough creates spaciousness. It softens the grip, it untangles the nerves, it lets the moment be whole without needing to be improved. This doesn't mean you stop growing. Growth continues, but it's not driven by lack. It's not fueled by shame. It's shaped by presence. You plant seeds not because you're empty, but because life moves forward. And when enough is your foundation, every step becomes a gift, not a demand. Even relationships change. You stop needing others to complete you, to always agree, to always show up a certain way. You love more freely, because love is no longer a transaction. It's a reflection of your own fullness, and that kind of love doesn't suffocate, it breathes. Simplicity also changes how you handle discomfort, because when the need to escape it lessens, it becomes easier to stay. You no longer require every moment to be pleasant. You're not constantly bargaining with now to get to better. You meet what is without resistance, and in that meeting, rest arises. Simplicity clears the mind, because complexity drains it. Each unnecessary choice steals attention. Each extra possession demands energy. Each false need creates pressure. But when the robe of enough is worn, when you begin living with what serves rather than what distracts, the noise fades, the clutter clears, and what's left is something closer to truth. This doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. To look gently at what you've been chasing, to ask what it's costing, to see if the wanting has brought peace or restlessness, and if it's the latter, to choose a different rhythm, one that honors your needs without feeding your cravings. You can start anywhere, by pausing before adding one more thing, by asking if this next yes supports your calm or steals it, by creating a little more space in your day, in your mind, in your home. Not to impress anyone, but to return to what's real. This practice doesn't need to be declared. It needs to be lived, quietly, steadily, in the way you move, in the way you breathe, in the way you greet what you already have as if it were enough, because it is. When this becomes your habit, rest is no longer a reward. It's a baseline, a way of being, not a break from being. And when life gets loud again, as it will, you'll have a place to return to. Not a place outside, but a feeling inside. The robe of enough. The stillness of not needing more. The clarity of letting go before being forced to. The peace of knowing what matters. Let this robe be yours tonight. Let it wrap around your thinking. Let it loosen the grip of striving. Let it say to your nervous system, "We are already home." And let every breath from here be a gesture of trust that the present moment is not incomplete. It's already full. From the stillness that grows in the robe of enough, where desire softens and presence expands, a quieter voice begins to emerge. Not one of discipline or denial, but of guidance. It doesn't demand more. It asks for depth. It doesn't shout. It points. Cravings haven't disappeared. They've simply begun to be seen for what they really are. Signals, not problems to suppress, but invitations to nourish something deeper. Now we meet these signals not with judgment, but with focus. And what we feed is no longer the restless mind. It's the inner monk, the part of us that's always been seeking something sacred beneath the noise. Cravings don't come from nowhere. They arise because something inside wants attention. But the mind often misinterprets the signal. It thinks hunger means food, that boredom means stimulation, that sadness means escape. So it grabs whatever's closest: sugar, scrolling, distraction. But these don't satisfy, they sedate. The signal keeps returning because the need was never met. Buddhism teaches not to fight craving, but to understand it, to meet it with presence, to look underneath. Because craving is not the enemy, it's the messenger, and the message is always the same. Something needs care. When you start to listen deeply, cravings become less chaotic. They start pointing inward, not outward. They start leading you toward devotion, not distraction. Devotional focus isn't religious, it's relational. It means choosing to pour your energy into something that brings depth instead of noise. It means turning craving into curiosity. Not asking, "How do I get what I want?" but "What is this really asking for?" That's how craving becomes clarity. When you stop feeding it with what's easy and start responding with what's true. This response begins in awareness. The moment craving arises, you pause, not to stop it, but to witness it, to hold it, to feel it fully, not follow it blindly. You name it, you breathe with it, you ask, "What is this craving pointing to?" And often, the answer is not in the object, but in the feeling, in the disconnection, in the absence of attention. The inner monk doesn't reject the body. It honors it. It doesn't shame the mind. It trains it. And it doesn't ignore craving. It refines it, turns it from addiction to devotion, from compulsion to choice, from emptiness to fullness, not by force, but by redirection, by feeding the part of you that craves stillness more than sugar, connection more than comfort, purpose more than pleasure. Craving often arises in stillness because the mind is used to constant input. So when it gets quiet, the mind panics. It wants something to grab. But if you stay, if you breathe, if you listen, you'll find that underneath the craving is not hunger. It's a longing for presence, for peace, for meaning. And when you give it that, the craving quiets, not because it was crushed, but because it was heard. This is the practice. Turn craving into inquiry. Not, how do I make this go away, but what is this asking me to see? And then offer that. A breath, a walk, a prayer, a moment of attention to the body, a gentle touch to the chest. A return to something that feeds the monk inside you, not the merchant, not the addict, not the chaser, but the watcher, the still one, the one who wants less, but lives more deeply. Over time, this changes your relationship with all forms of desire. You don't reject them, you read them. A craving for connection becomes a call to speak truthfully. A craving for success becomes a call to serve. A craving for comfort becomes a call to slow down. Each one becomes a gate. Each one becomes a teacher. This also rewires your nervous system. Because when craving is met with conscious attention instead of quick reward, the body stops chasing false highs. It begins to stabilize, to regulate. You no longer need dopamine spikes to feel okay. You need presence, and presence doesn't crash, it sustains. Feeding the inner monk means building habits that anchor you in clarity, not out of pressure, but out of reverence. You wake up and offer your first breath to the present moment. You eat with attention. You walk without rushing. You speak from center. You do these things not because they're easy, but because they nourish a part of you that junk pleasure never could. And when you fall, when you give in to the old cravings, you don't collapse in shame. You don't spiral. You return. You say, I fed the wrong part today. That's okay. I'm still learning how to listen. And then you come back to the quiet, to the choice, to the part of you that is never in a hurry. This approach isn't strict. It's gentle. It doesn't create rules. It creates space. Space to respond instead of react. Space to choose the deeper nourishment. To feel when you're feeding fear or feeding clarity. To sense when you're chasing approval or returning to presence. Over time, craving becomes less sharp. Not because you've dulled yourself, but because you've fed the hunger behind it. You've learned to give yourself what you actually need: stillness, meaning, care, connection. And in doing so, the craving becomes quiet, like a child who has finally been held. Let this be your practice tonight. Not to fight craving, not to shame it, but to see it clearly. To ask it what it needs. To walk it to the well and let it drink from something real. A breath, a truth, a silence that holds. From the moment craving softened and was gently rerouted toward deeper nourishment, a new kind of silence began to bloom. Not the silence of denial or absence, but the silence that grows when the search ends. When the mind stops chasing something to complete itself. In that stillness, something else becomes visible. An old habit, often unnoticed, that causes quiet suffering. The habit of holding tightly to I. The belief in a fixed, personal self that must defend, prove, perform, and solve everything before it can rest. But tonight, there is nothing left to solve. only the invitation to sleep in the Buddha's shadow, where non-self becomes not an idea to understand, but a soft place to lay down all that has been carried. The concept of non-self, or anatta, is one of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. It's not a denial of experience, nor a statement that nothing exists. It's a pointer, a quiet pointing away from the illusion that there is a permanent, unchanging core inside you that must always be in control. And when that illusion fades, peace begins. Because what kept the mind awake was not the day's events. It was the sense that everything was happening to you, that you were responsible for fixing it all, that you had to carry the weight of being someone. But if the idea of you is allowed to dissolve even slightly, the grip releases. Thoughts still arise, but they are not yours. Emotions move, but they do not define you. There is no owner, no possessor, no fixed identity to protect, just the flow of life. And in that realization, the body starts to rest, not just physically, but deeply. Because what could the self defend if there is no self to defend? Before sleep, this is a powerful doorway. Because nighttime is when the stories come strongest. Regrets, plans, self-judgment, mental loops about what should have been said or done. But each of those stories depends on a central character, I. Without that character, the plot collapses, the mind unravels, and peace is what's left. This is not about erasing your life or pretending nothing matters. It's about loosening the identification, shifting from I failed to failure arose, from I am anxious to anxiety is present, from I must fix everything to this moment is happening. Each shift removes a hook from the identity, and with every unhooking, sleep comes closer. Even in science, identity is seen as a construct. Neurologically, the sense of self is built from memory, language, perception. It's a function, a convenience. It helps us move through the world, but it is not fixed. It is not real in the way pain feels real or breath feels real. It's a mask that becomes mistaken for a face. When this is understood, not intellectually but experientially, the heart softens. You realize you are not your name, not your habits, not even your roles. You are not the voice in your head that's worried. You are the space in which the voice arises. You are the stillness that watches the story play out. And from that place, fear dissolves, not because it's been defeated, but because it has no one left to cling to. As you lie down to sleep, try this. Instead of reviewing your day, watch the thoughts without a center. Let them appear like clouds and fade without naming them. Feel the body without saying, my body. Sense the breath without claiming it as mine. Let everything be. Not yours, not about you, just present. The nervous system, once freed from identity, begins to regulate. Muscles relax without trying. The breath deepens without effort. Because the pressure to be someone, to carry something, to achieve something, even in sleep, has been released. You are no longer holding yourself up. You are being held. Non-self is not emptiness. It is freedom. It is not dissociation. It is intimacy with all things, because there is no boundary between you and them. When the I steps back, the world steps in. Sound becomes clearer, breath becomes fuller, and every moment becomes enough, including this one. There's no need to rehearse who you'll be tomorrow, no need to replay who you were today. Those are costumes, temporary. useful for a while, but not needed now. The sleep that comes in the shadow of the Buddha is the sleep of letting go of roles, letting go of past, letting go of future. What remains is presence so still, it no longer needs to be called anything. Even dreams shift when non-self is remembered. The mind no longer needs to run stories of conflict and self-preservation. It can drift, float, rest in awareness that doesn't separate experience from experiencer. It becomes the breeze, the wave, the quiet. Let this be your final practice tonight. Not a doing, not a fixing, just a soft, resting in the truth that you do not need to carry yourself into sleep. Sleep will arrive, not because you chase it, but because there is no one left chasing. The bed will hold the body, the breath will hold the rhythm, and the space of no self will hold the peace. There is no you left to impress, no you left to repair, no you that needs to figure anything out before rest is allowed. All that is needed now is presence, open, empty, whole. And as the night deepens, that presence will carry you gently into sleep. From the soft place where identity dissolved and no one was left to carry the weight of the day, the body finally began to surrender. Thoughts didn't need to stop for peace to arise. They simply lost their grip. The craving to control, to explain, to become something vanished into stillness. But even here, as sleep draws near, thoughts may continue to come. They drift, they return, they flicker. And this is where one final invitation appears. What if every thought could be seen without judgment? What if the mind, instead of resisting or reacting, became a mirror with no dust? This is a Zen metaphor, the mirror that reflects without distortion. It doesn't prefer one image over another. It doesn't hold on to what appears. It doesn't resist what enters. A spotless mirror sees clearly, not because it tries harder, but because it doesn't add anything extra. No stories, no analysis, no inner dialogue about how the reflection should be. And this is the heart of true calm. Not a mind without thoughts, but a mind that no longer adds judgment to them. Judgment is the first crack in peace, not the thought itself, but the commentary that follows. A thought arises, maybe sadness, maybe fear, maybe a memory, and almost immediately the mind speaks. This shouldn't be here. Why am I still thinking about that? What's wrong with me? But none of that commentary is the original thought. It's dust. And the more dust that settles, the harder it becomes to see clearly. To see without judgment is not to become passive. It is to become precise. To know the difference between what arises naturally and what the mind adds on top. This is the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the original feeling. Suffering is everything the mind builds around it. When the mirror is clean, pain is still pain, but it doesn't stick. It passes through, just like a cloud reflected on a lake. This clarity doesn't require silence. It requires honesty. To say, a thought has come without saying, this means I'm broken. To say, there is tension, without saying, I must be failing at calm. This is the mind returning to its original state, not empty of thought but free from struggle. You can practice this anytime, right now. As you listen, thoughts are moving through, some clear, some tangled, but none of them need judgment. They don't need fixing. They don't need labeling. They don't need to be chased or feared or held onto, just seen, like wind moving across water, like shadow passing over a mountain, just noticed and let be. This changes the nervous system, because what creates stress isn't just the thought, it's the fight against it, the tension of resistance. But when the thought is allowed to pass through the mirror without commentary, the body stays calm. The breath remains steady, the system stays open. Even so-called negative thoughts lose their sting this way. Anger is just a pulse. Fear is just a signal. Shame is just an echo. But if none of them are believed or judged, they lose their shape. They pass like sound, not like storms. The mind remains clear, not because nothing enters it, but because nothing sticks to it. This is why Zen teaches presence without preference. Not to be numb, but to stop pushing and pulling, to let joy come without clinging, to let sadness come without shrinking, to see both as movements of weather, not definitions of who you are, because who you are is the mirror, not what appears on it. Thoughts may keep coming, that's their nature, but you don't have to follow, you don't have to analyze, you don't have to make meaning out of every one. Some thoughts are just echoes, some are old habits, some are noise, but none of them are truth until you call them truth. None of them define you unless you grab hold. Seeing without judgment also changes how you speak to yourself. The inner voice softens, the harshness fades. Because you've stopped attacking the messenger, you've stopped assuming that every mental appearance is a flaw. You've begun to trust your awareness more than your analysis. This trust deepens over time. It becomes instinct. The moment judgment starts to form, you see it too. You don't push it away, you watch it. And even judgment, when seen clearly, loses its sharpness. It becomes just another reflection, just another thought to let pass. This clarity is especially important before sleep, because nighttime is when thoughts tend to twist. The mind starts replaying. The critic gets louder. The fears sneak in. But if you can stay in the mirror, watching without reacting, those thoughts lose their weight. They become background instead of burden. Let this be your practice as you rest tonight. Let every thought be seen without needing it to mean anything. Let each one pass without lifting it up or pushing it down. Let the mind be a mirror that reflects everything and holds nothing, not because it's resisting, but because it no longer needs to cling. This is the deepest form of rest. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of grasping. The freedom to let the world move through your awareness without shaping it into a problem. This is where the mind becomes truly still, not by silencing life, but by meeting it with spaciousness. Let the mirror clear. Let the breath slow. Let the stories fall away. You are not your thoughts. You are not what appears in the mirror. You are the space that sees clearly, quietly, endlessly, no matter what moves through it. And now, from this clarity, we rest. No more seeking, no more solving. Just the light of awareness reflecting thought, breath, and sleep as they come and go. From the clarity of the mirror where thoughts no longer needed to be judged, the mind grew still, not empty, but free. Free to witness without reacting, free to let each thought rise and fall without painting it with meaning. In that stillness, something unexpected emerged, not an answer, but a question, one that didn't need to be solved, one that didn't create tension, just a quiet presence, a mystery, a space left open, and within that space, peace. Because sometimes what the mind needs most is not an explanation. It's the permission to not know. This is the koan of stillness, the art of letting questions sit unanswered, and in doing so, discovering a deeper calm than certainty could ever offer. In Zen Buddhism, a koan is not a riddle with a solution. It is a question designed to break the mind's habit of needing resolution. It doesn't make sense on purpose, because the goal is not logic, it's liberation. And liberation comes when the mind stops trying to force answers and starts resting in what's already here. Most unrest comes from the search for closure. The mind asks, why did this happen? What will they think? What should I do? What if I fail? And when those questions don't get immediate answers, the mind panics. It loops, it spirals. But the truth is, most of these questions don't need to be answered. They need to be held. They need to be honored without being solved, because the demand for certainty is often the very thing keeping peace out of reach. There is a power in not knowing, a softness, a surrender. When you stop insisting on resolution, the nervous system quiets. The heart no longer has to defend. The breath becomes smooth again. The body stops bracing. Because it's not the question that creates stress, it's the belief that an answer is missing and that it's your job to find it right now. Letting the question sit is not avoidance. It's presence. It's acknowledging that some things cannot be solved by thinking. Some things are too large, too tender, too mysterious to be pinned down. They must be lived through. And in that living, answers sometimes appear, not because they were forced, but because the mind became quiet enough to receive them. This practice begins with one shift. When a question arises, you don't chase. You breathe, you pause, you notice the urge to solve, and instead of following it, you stay. You let the question be a companion, not a command. You say, "This too belongs here," and you keep breathing. Over time, this changes the shape of thinking. You no longer feel that uncertainty is a threat. You start to see it as a gateway, a threshold between old ways of seeing and new ways of being. It becomes a space where something more honest can emerge, something not built from fear or urgency, but from patience and depth. This also changes how you approach problems. Instead of rushing to fix, you begin by listening. You wait. You trust that wisdom doesn't always shout. It often whispers, and it only speaks when the noise of your seeking has quieted enough for you to hear it. Letting questions rest also softens relationships. You stop demanding explanations from others. You stop needing closure from every conversation. You begin to understand that people, like life, are complex. They don't always make sense, and they don't need to. Love does not depend on full understanding. It depends on presence. Even your relationship with yourself begins to shift. You stop interrogating your past. You stop needing to justify your emotions. You stop turning every doubt into a flaw, and you begin to offer yourself the same grace. To not know, to not be finished, to be in process. This is the core of the koan, not confusion, but invitation. It invites you to rest in the middle. Not the beginning, not the end, just the middle, right here, where nothing is resolved, but everything is alive. Where questions are not burdens, but companions. Where mystery is not something to escape, but something to enter fully. You can feel this in the body. When a question is dropped into silence, the breath deepens, the chest softens, the shoulders loosen, because the pressure to solve has lifted. What remains is space, spaciousness that allows you to be even when you don't understand. This practice doesn't mean giving up on clarity. It means not rushing it, letting it ripen, letting it arrive in its own time. Because some questions are not meant to be answered now, and some may never be answered at all, and still life continues. Still you breathe, still you belong. Tonight, let this be your resting place. Let the questions come without fear. Let them sit beside you like old friends, not ones you need to fix, but ones you can breathe with. What will tomorrow bring? Let that question stay unanswered. Why do I still feel this way? Let that question rest. What if I never figure this out? Let that question be held by something deeper than thought. And in this quiet holding, the mind no longer needs to be right. It no longer needs to win. It no longer needs to protect a story. It can rest, because peace does not come from answers. It comes from the freedom to let go of needing them. Let yourself fall into this stillness now, not because everything is figured out, but because it doesn't have to be. You are safe here, even without knowing, especially without knowing. Let the question remain, and let sleep carry you into its silence. From the stillness where questions were finally allowed to remain open, not needing to be answered, another kind of knowing begins to rise, quiet, unspoken, and far older than thought. It doesn't come through analysis. It doesn't argue. It arrives like breath in a sleeping room, subtle, easy to miss, but undeniably present once you feel it. This is the silent bell, a kind of wisdom that never needed to speak to be known. It doesn't call attention to itself. It doesn't arrive through effort. And yet it's always been there, guiding the mind, calming the body, realigning the heart. There is a common misunderstanding that peace must be earned through explanation. That calm comes only after the problem is solved. But Buddhism teaches that peace comes from the space beneath the solving. The place where intuitive wisdom already knows what the mind hasn't yet figured out. This wisdom does not operate in language. It doesn't need to. It shows itself in presence, in decisions that feel right without needing justification, in moments where the mind steps back and something deeper simply knows. Everyone has experienced this. A moment of clarity without effort, a sudden stillness that makes everything obvious, a feeling of yes or no that doesn't come from weighing pros and cons. These moments are not accidents. They are echoes of the silent bell. They arise when the noise quiets down enough to hear something more ancient than logic, something that has never been spoken aloud but lives in the body, in the breath, in the ground under your feet. The reason this wisdom is often missed is not because it's rare, but because the mind is loud. Thought rushes to narrate, interpret, evaluate. It wants to turn intuition into explanation. But the moment it does, the purity is lost. The signal becomes clouded, the bell becomes distant. This is why silence is sacred. Not as absence, but as amplifier. True guidance comes from this place, not because it has the loudest voice, but because it doesn't try to convince. It doesn't shout over your doubt. It just waits. And when you stop chasing new thoughts, when you stop trying to solve everything through analysis, this deeper knowing steps forward, not with answers, but with presence, not with plans, but with direction. This direction can be felt in the body. It doesn't create tension. It creates alignment. A yes that opens the chest. A no that tightens the gut. These are not random reactions. They are signals from the part of you that has always known the truth, long before your mind tried to package it in language. In practice, this means learning to trust the space between thoughts, to pause before responding, to feel the echo of the bell before rushing to speak. It means recognizing that not every decision needs to be thought through. Some just need to be felt fully. And the more you listen this way, the clearer the signal becomes. The more often you hear what was always there. This doesn't mean abandoning thinking. It means letting it serve, not lead. Letting thought arise after the bell, not before. Letting logic shape the details, not dictate the direction. Wisdom doesn't argue with logic. It includes it, but it doesn't depend on it. It roots deeper. This kind of listening becomes a way of living, not just during meditation, but in daily movement. You begin to feel when something is out of alignment before it becomes a problem. You know when to step back without needing a reason. You sense when someone's words are true, not because of evidence, but because of resonance. The silent bell also protects you, not by fear, but by quiet knowing. That feeling in the chest when something feels wrong. That stillness in the mind when something is right. You don't have to justify these signals. You have to honor them, because when you do, life begins to move with less resistance. Not because everything is easy, but because you've stopped betraying what you already know. Even in moments of loss or confusion, the bell is there. Not fixing, not changing outcomes, just holding. Reminding you that something in you can stay calm even when everything else shakes. Something in you doesn't need to panic, doesn't need to know why, just needs to remain present. Letting this kind of wisdom guide your life means releasing the need for certainty. You stop needing everything to make sense before you act. You start trusting what feels rooted, what feels clear in your body, even when it's hard to explain. This is not recklessness. This is ancient intelligence. Intelligence that exists beneath language. Intelligence that does not need permission to be true. This silent bell also guides healing. It tells you when to rest, even when the world says push. It tells you when to speak, even when the voice trembles. It tells you when to let go, even when the mind wants to hold on. Healing is not just about fixing the past. It's about realigning with what's always been whole. Let this be your practice now. As the night deepens, as the thoughts slow, listen. Not with ears, not with thoughts, but with awareness. The bell is always ringing, not in sound, but in stillness. Not in logic, but in truth. And the more you listen, the more you know, without needing to understand how you know. This is the deepest calm. The kind that doesn't ask for silence, but grows from it. The kind that doesn't need to figure it all out to feel safe. The kind that rises from a place in you that has never been touched by fear. Let that place guide you now. Let it hold your breath. Let it guide your dreams. Let it remind you that nothing needs to be louder than this. From the soft echo of the silent bell, where wisdom whispered without words and knowing arose without effort, the mind began to shift its center of gravity. It no longer clung to the illusion that clarity had to come from thinking. It remembered something older, something beyond analysis. But even here, in the deepest peace, one thread often remains, the subtle belief that everything arising within is somehow personal, that every thought is yours, that every feeling belongs to you, that every breath is mine. And that's the next veil to lift, because the moment this belief loosens, a profound spaciousness enters, a calm that is no longer limited by identity. This is the inhale of the universe, the realization that the breath moving through you was never yours to begin with. Most people live with the constant tension of ownership. The mind is seen as a personal chamber. Thoughts are labeled as my thoughts, emotions as my feelings, and this ownership creates pressure. Because if the thoughts are mine, then I must control them. If the emotions are mine, I must manage them. If the breath is mine, I must make it right. And that responsibility becomes heavy. But Buddhism offers a different way of seeing, one that starts with the breath. The breath is the most intimate yet most impersonal experience. It happens through the body, but not because of the ego. No one needs to remember to breathe. No one needs to design it. It moves on its own. And not just in you, but in all beings. It moves in animals, in forests, across oceans. The wind that sways trees is not separate from the air that fills your lungs. It's one breath, moving through different forms. When the breath is seen this way, tension releases. You stop gripping your experience. You start noticing that my body is just a temporary form shaped by something larger. That the inhale is not your possession, but a rhythm shared by everything alive. And suddenly, breathing becomes sacred, not because it's dramatic, but because it's universal. Because it reminds you that life is not happening to you, it's happening through you. This insight changes everything. It unravels the personal story that fuels most suffering. If thoughts are not mine, I don't have to fix all of them. If feelings are not mine, I don't have to justify or suppress them. If breath is not mine, I can simply rest in it. Let it move me. Let it guide me. Let it remind me that I am not separate. This is not disconnection. It's deeper connection. You're not ignoring experience. You're realizing it doesn't need to be owned. You're realizing that awareness is not a possession. It's participation. You're part of the stream, not the stone. And once you feel that, the idea of me becomes softer, less heavy, less sharp. Still here, but transparent. You start to see that the mind is not a private room with locked doors. It's a field, a movement. Thoughts come and go like weather across the sky. They don't announce their origin. They don't belong to anyone. They're just passing patterns. And the moment you stop claiming them, they stop sticking. This is freedom, not the freedom to control, but the freedom to release. You don't need to manage every sensation. You don't need to label every shift. You just breathe and let the universe breathe you. This also brings a deep sense of peace in daily life, because much of the stress we carry is not from what's happening, but from thinking we must do it alone, that every emotion must be processed personally, that every mistake defines us. But when you step back from ownership, the mind softens. It becomes more fluid, less reactive, more compassionate. Even suffering becomes lighter. Pain still arises. Difficulty still moves through. But you're no longer adding the weight of, this is my failure, this is my burden, this is my fault. You're simply present with what is, letting the body feel it, letting the breath hold it, letting the moment move through. Over time, this shapes how you show up in the world. You listen more because you're not busy defending your perspective. You pause more because you're not rushing to protect your identity. You respond more gently because you've stopped taking every thought personally. And this makes your presence feel safe, to others and to yourself. This is what non-separation really means. Not merging with everything, but remembering you were never cut off. You were never outside the rhythm. The inhale of the universe has always been moving through you. You just forgot. You mistook the movement for a possession. But now, the grip loosens. Let this be your resting place tonight. Let the breath move you without effort. Let it enter and leave like waves on the shore. Don't label it. Don't own it. Just notice it. Just receive it. Each inhale not as yours, but as part of something older than the body, wider than the mind, deeper than the self. This is where peace becomes effortless, because effort was only needed to protect the idea of me. And once that softens, the whole system breathes easier. Not because you fixed anything, but because you finally let go of the belief that it was ever yours to fix. And now, from this breath that belongs to no one and flows through everything, we continue. Not into more thoughts, but into the quiet space beneath them, where stillness is not absence, but presence without ownership. After 3 quiet hours of returning, breath by breath, thought by thought, moment by moment, you've arrived somewhere the world rarely dares to go. Stillness, a calm that doesn't beg for silence, but lives underneath the noise. You've wandered through teachings not meant to be memorized, but felt. From the soundless gong that trained your mind to hear what isn't said, to the robe of enough that loosened the grip of desire. You learned to bow to the moment, to bend like bamboo, to touch the earth inside your own awareness. You learned that not every thought needs to be believed, and not every question needs to be answered. That peace is not something you chase, it's something you uncover when you stop claiming every breath, every thought, every feeling as mine. You met the ghost thoughts. You watched your identity dissolve like a sand mandala. You remembered how to breathe with trees, how to nourish the inner monk, how to fall asleep not by silencing the mind, but by realizing it never needed to be fought. And now you rest, not because everything is perfect, but because you've made peace with what is. The mind doesn't need to know. The self doesn't need to fix. The breath doesn't need to be owned. Stillness is enough. This moment is enough. You are enough. If these teachings touched something deep in you, leave a comment below. Write, "I am calm now." Let it be your offering, your reminder, your way of closing the loop. And if you want more journeys like this, ones that don't just help you fall asleep, but help you wake up differently, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. There's more peace where this came from. Sleep well, wake light, and thank you for traveling this path with us.